and welcome to the January 17th, 2023 meeting of the Dover School Committee, Sherborn School Committee, and the Dover-Sherborn Regional School Committee. My name is Sarah Gutierrez-Dunn, and I call this meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. We are pleased to hold this open meeting at Dover-Sherborn Middle School this evening, and we are also Zooming and live streaming with DSD TV. Please note that this meeting is also being recorded. And we have many members of the school committees present in person this evening. I understand that we may also be joined by a member who will be participating remotely, as is permitted by the Act relative to extending certain state of emergency accommodations signed into law by Governor Baker on July 16th, 2022. And first on our agenda this evening is community comments. We have provided a Zoom link for those who wish to make a comment, but for whom it is not possible or preferred to attend in person this evening. And I am pleased to welcome those of you who are here with us in person to do as well. So before I read the preamble, I would like to ask, is there anyone who would like to make a community comment this evening? And please raise your hand if so. All right, bear with me for a moment. I'll read our ground rules. Please remember that community comments are an opportunity for members of the school committee to listen to members of the community. It is not a forum for answering questions or engaging in debate. We respectfully request that you please make your comments brief, no more than 3 minutes, and that you move the discussion forward by adding new information. Please try to avoid repeating points that have already been made. And once the public comment section of the meeting has been concluded, we will move on to other business, and unsolicited comments from the community will no longer be permitted. This is standard operating procedure in school committee meetings across our 3 school districts. And Jeff, might I ask you, since we have some members in the audience who would like to make a comment, to help with our as our timer this evening?
No problem.
Thank you. All right. So, please, if you would stand up and introduce yourself by name and provide the town that you are from. We welcome your comments at this time.
Hi, I'm Monica Gupta, and I'm a sophomore at Dover-Sherborn High School, and I'm one of the officers of the Asian Student Union. We are here on behalf of our club and the Asian community in order to get the Lunar New Year and Diwali recognized officially in the Dover-Sherborn school calendar as school holidays. Lunar New Year is celebrated around the end of January to the beginning of February, and this year it happens to fall this coming weekend. It marks the beginning of the lunar calendar, and about 1/5 of the entire world's population celebrates it, which works out to be about 1.6 billion people. It's celebrated not only in just China, but in other countries such as Japan, Korea, Indonesia, and Vietnam. It is also the biggest holiday for all who celebrate, and is centered around family and community. It is like the U.S. holidays of Thanksgiving and New Year's combined, and it is just as big as Christmas is for the Western culture. Diwali is celebrated towards the end of October or early November, celebrated by over 1 billion people worldwide. It is the festival of lights and is recognized as a national holiday in India, also known to be the biggest Indian holiday, highlighting family and community. And it is similar to Christmas with both historical, cultural, and religious significance. It is celebrated by people all over Southern Asia, and is an official holiday of the religions of Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism.
Hi, I'm Annie Chan, and I'm a senior at Dover-Sherborn High School, and I'm also one of the officers in Asian Student Union. And there are a few ways we are affected by not having these holidays recognized as a day off from school. A lot of traditions that usually would take up a whole day are cut short because there is simply not enough time to go to school, complete homework, and do all the traditions. For example, calling relatives is a huge part of both days since they are largely about family, and this is difficult because of the time zones, and that it can take several hours to call relatives, and yeah, it's really it really affects large families. And for the Lunar New Year specifically, we also wrap dumplings in the morning and cook them all afternoon to prepare for dinner, which takes a lot of time since our relatives and family friends all join in. And then as for Diwali, a central part of the celebration is decorating the entire house together with family and meeting with relatives if possible, which similarly takes many hours. And we know that some of our own club members raise concerns such as saying that stress, homework, and assignments take away from the celebration since it takes up too much time. And we know that DS tries to help with this by allowing students to turn in their assignments later, but the work will just pile up and lead to more stress the next day, and you still have to make up the work that you left behind.
I'm Amber Nye, and I'm a sophomore at Dover-Sherborn High School, and I'm the third officer of the Asian Student Union. According to the government data provided for the public, the Dover population is about 13% Asian. Sherborn is unknown at the moment, but its county, Middlesex County, is about 13.9%. And the enrollment data for the 2022 to 2023 Dover-Sherborn is in the middle school and the high school combined is about 12.6% Asian. Chickering is 13.1%, and Pine Hill is 8%, which makes Asians the second largest ethnicity in the DS community. The racial discrimination against Asians has been on the rise since COVID started 3 years ago, so having the Lunar New Year and Diwali as a school holiday will allow Asian students to have the opportunity to celebrate their heritage and feel proud of their identity. It would also send the message that Dover-Sherborn High School values all of their different cultures. As of May 25th, 2022, Brookline, Hopkinton, and Wayland all recognize Lunar New Year as a day off from school. Wellesley is currently in the process of approving it for their school calendar. Hopkinton, Acton, Foxborough, Holliston, Littleton, Westboro, and Ashland all have Diwali off. Shrewsbury is also in discussion currently for making the change for their next year's calendar. Additionally, California, as this whole state, has the Lunar New Year off because it became a state holiday. We urge you to consider the views of the Asian community and approve the Lunar New Year and Diwali as school holidays. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Annika. Annie and Amber.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I'm a 6th grader at DS. I think Chinese New Year should be a holiday because every year there are many more Asian students, and it is special to every family who celebrate it. Being from a mixed-race family, my dad always felt we were not able to celebrate his cultural holidays equally. Having the day off would allow us to spend more time with our family and celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other community comments? Please.
I want to say that was fabulous. I'm so glad you guys brought that up. That's not my community comment. So, my name is Alexandra Frank. I moved to Sherborn last July, have 2 children at Pine Hill, and have no religious or political affiliations. It's my duty as a community member to share the negative experience my family had with diversity, equity, and inclusion work at our old school. For the 2.5 years prior to moving, our school was dominated by DEI work and academics were neglected. Students fell behind in coursework, but became experts in DEI topics while parents watched in obedient silence. Any parent bold enough to ask questions was labeled, ostracized, and shown the door. Thus, many families and teachers left, including a board member as the school continued on its mission. The board and administration used the exact same language, tactics, and protocol being used here. They behaved as if the whole community agreed, when it was a small, very vocal fraction. They repeatedly denied requested information and answers to community questions regarding the DEI work they were doing as a board and in classrooms. Major curricular changes were made without obtaining parental consent and disclosing a precise, scientifically backed plan to the community for pre-approval. An environment of division, distrust, and isolation resulted, but most importantly, the school's purpose became DEI work rather than academics. It was a colossal failure for everyone. From conversations with diverse members of this community, I know we're here for the district's historically strong academic reputation. As evidenced by large numbers of families who seek math and other academic courses outside of school due to lack of challenge, the academics clearly need improvement and should be prioritized. Instead, DEI work is the focus, with calls from NYU for urgent, significant changes based on open-ended survey responses from a small fraction of the community. For success, any major changes require meticulous planning, complete transparency with the community and its approval, the provision of scientific evidence, and gradual, careful execution as opposed to a warp speed stealth mission. The superintendent's recent emails are appreciated attempts to improve transparency, encourage community feedback, and provide community educational opportunities. I would have loved to have seen this effort earlier, along with clear and thorough responses to questions that were raised at the community forum and the promised, quote, unpacking and prioritization of the audit and its recommendations by the caregivers and community, end quote. I am not alone in currently exploring alternative schools and districts. Going forward, I'll be extremely observant, communicative, especially with my kids, review school committee meetings, and participate in all offerings to further my education and stay informed. I encourage all residents to join me. I'd like to kindly remind all committee members you're here today with your chosen superintendent and assistant because the residents of this school district elected you to represent all of them and act in the best interest of the community while always being objective, impartial, and professional. Thanks for representing all of us in this manner so you can earn our trust and support. And I'm happy to be reached at arfrank401@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Frank. Any other community comments?
Yeah, I just want to share some, viewpoint as a family from China. Because in China, the Chinese New Year is the largest and most important festival of our culture. So in China, all the businesses shut down, and school closed for at least 8 days. In some part of the country, it's even 15 days to really allow the family to travel across the country and reunite the family. Because sometimes they're living very scattered across the country. And in the U.S. and also we have families all over places, and sometimes we will spend the day and to call them or reunited to celebrate this very, very important festival of us. And also, if you imagine you have high schoolers, he has, like 8 pages of historical reading, and meanwhile he has to finish the English test that's coming tomorrow, and also some other homework. You kind of feel bad for him, but when he has loads of work to do, and while the rest of the family they're celebrating. And also, being a Chinese, so this is the most important festival for us. It's also kind of like integral part for us to really truly value the culture and the identity of our country. So it's really, really great if our kids can take the day off and really spend time with the family and celebrate this most important festival.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Other comments? Anyone on the Zoom?
I think there's a hand up. Is there a hand up?
No, it's just. Oh, I think that's just the cursor.
It's your hand.
Okay. Just the cursor.
No, I don't. Is there anybody on Zoom who'd like to make a comment?
All right. Thank you to the members of the community who provided their input. We appreciate it. That closes our community comments for this evening, and we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a series of reports and updates, beginning with an update on or a check-in regarding the formative evaluation from our superintendent, Ms. McCoy.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Yes, students should feel free to go. I know they have lots of homework and activities too.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
It's not rude if you need to go. We get it. Thank you for coming.
So we are halfway through the school year. The high school is currently in midterms. And so for those of us who do evaluations, that means we're at the formative point of the evaluation process for our educators. And my evaluation as a superintendent mirrors that process. So this is an opportunity for me to share with you an update on the progress around my goals and ask the committee for feedback in terms of what you would like me to start collecting in anticipation of the summative evaluation in April. So we have 3 district goals, and then I have 3 superintendent goals. I've outlined for you in the packet. I don't need to read to you what I'm sure you've already previewed, but just a reminder, the first goal is around setting a strategic path. So we've been doing a lot of work as a district around challenge success and supporting the whole child, around the portrait of a graduate, and making sure that our students are prepared for a world we can't even imagine what that will look like upon their graduation, and taking all of these ideas around best practices and putting them together so it doesn't feel like such a jumbled mesh of initiatives, but instead, what does good teaching look like? What do good assessments look like? What does good curriculum look like? So thanks to Mr. Conklin's support, our faculties are well underway in identifying their best practices within their building. They are very consistent across the 4 buildings, and as we tweak them and refine them over the course of the year, we'll be publishing them as the vision for best teaching and learning for the district moving forward. The second is the equity audit. I again outlined the work that's been done to date, and there'll be a further presentation about that later this evening, so I'm happy to answer questions now or then. Supporting all students, our work around MTSS continues. That's the idea of having multiple tiers of support for all of our students academically, social, emotionally, and behaviorally. We will be having a presentation around that as well, so I will leave most of the important information to Ms. McCarthy to share. So those are the 3 district goals. In terms of my goals, the first is around the entry process. I included details on all of the people I've interviewed, either independently, in focus groups. I have the survey that I've sent out a number of times and asked for feedback. I just sent that out again this morning to all 4 PTOs and CSAs and asked them to distribute it within their newsletters as well, hoping to get a greater response level. Denny and I will be meeting with students in early February and doing a survey with them as well about what they value about the Dover-Sherborn schools and what their vision for the future of our district is. We are also both reviewing a number of documents and data sources, and we're hoping to bring to you in April preliminary findings to share with you, and then the leadership team will take those findings over the summer and develop strategic priorities for the district for the next 3 to 5 years. So that's goal number 1. Goal number 2 is maintaining momentum during the transition. So as you know, I was an internal candidate, so there is some momentum already, but I will say my hat has changed in that I now evaluate and support all 4 principals as well as our 3 central office members. So I have met with all of them, done goal setting, and continue to meet with our central office folks, Dawn, Kate, and Denny once a week. And our leaders, I check in with them once a week as a team, and then individually as a month we do walkthroughs in their buildings. So I continue to provide feedback, and we continue to grow together as we support our schools and our students. And the last goal is around the new superintendent induction program. I've lost track. I'm glad I wrote it down. So I've been to 10 sessions so far to date. I have 4 more ahead of me. You've all had a chance to meet my coach, John Sills, who continues to offer his time both as prescribed in the program and above and beyond that to come to meetings, to sit in on sessions, to give feedback. And so I feel very lucky to have the amount of support that I do through John, through the new superintendent induction program, and through the group listservs that I have with local superintendents and superintendents across the state who are willing to answer any and all questions at any time of day about whatever topic I need. So that's the updates. As you know, I am evaluated against the superintendent goals as well as the 4 standards for superintendents around curriculum planning and instruction, supporting all students, professional culture, and management and operations. Of course, I couldn't do any portion of that rubric by myself. I rely on Denny, Kate, and Dawn to help me get that work done. But across those 4 standards, there's roughly 40 indicators of things that you might be looking for. So I'm happy to provide you evidence of any and all of them. It's my understanding through MASC and in speaking with other district superintendents, oftentimes subcommittees of the evaluation team will identify a few major indicators you'd like me to show evidence on. So I'm requesting that that's something that the subcommittee for evaluation think about, is which ones you'd like more information on than not. And I'm happy to provide information about any and all of them. Lastly, a few things I'd just like to highlight that haven't been represented either in the district goals or my goals of work that's been happening this year. As you know, I'm new to my role, but I'm also working with a new assistant superintendent who has been a great partner. We have a new administrative assistant in the building to the superintendent, which has also been a lot of newness. And we have 2 new middle school administrators. So lots of newness and support for each other going on behind the scenes. And again, I thank John and Kate for all of their support as well throughout all of these transitions. I've been working on communications with almost monthly newsletters. I missed December because I was sick in the holidays, and then doing my best to be transparent about any discussion and conversation around equity. School safety continues to be a priority. We are installing cameras at the region, as you know, and you'll be looking at the policy again this evening. We continue to hold drills on a regular basis with our students and our staff. And we are working with Synergy 911, Jason, our partner, who you've all met last year at a joint meeting, to talk about the next level of training to make sure that students are ready to internalize some of these ideas. So regardless of whether they're in school or at the mall or at church, they have some tools in their back pocket to know how to handle difficult situations. Discipline, we have partnered with one of our own parents, Colleen Ryan, to talk about what restorative practices might look like in Dover-Sherborn, as well as an administrator from Boston who is very well versed in this, and we're hoping to roll out some more training for our administrative team, which has been in discussion for a long time, and we're eager to move that forward. Our HR audit, as you know, there were several recommendations coming out of the HR audit that was done of central office last year, one of which is to create a position primarily responsible for HR responsibilities and ensuring compliance with the district. We have partnered with Dr. Tom Campbell, who is the former DR director in Needham, person extraordinaire, and he is going to be helping us work through that audit and identify the roles and responsibilities of this new person, and shift and adjust things in central office as necessary, get this person up and running. So we are eager to start conversations with him, and I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to meet him at some point. We have a special education audit happening as well, and thanks to Kate and her support, we'll be getting some preliminary findings later this week from our old friends, Deb and Dorsey, who you met from the first reorganization 4 years ago, 2018? 19, 3 years ago. So looking at the changes that we've made as a district in special education, what's working, what still needs to be tweaked, and what recommendations we have moving forward, which may or may not have budget implications for us. Lastly, I mentioned this in our 2 local meetings, but negotiations are underway with our educators, so thank you to all of those who are serving your communities with the gift of time to work with our educators to make sure that they're supported and have a fair contract. Dawn and I are also working with our Educational Assistants Association, custodians, food service, and admin assist to settle their contracts as well, and we'll keep you settled as those things go. As I was joking with Denny, lots of things happen behind the scenes around human resources and student discipline that I can't share with you, but we are certainly busy with those topics as well. So lots of learning in this new role, lots to do, but I'm excited to be here, and I'd like to just remind you that feedback is important to me as a professional and as a personal on a personal level, so anything that you have to share, I ask that you share along the way so that there aren't any surprises come April when we do the summative evaluation, because I'd like to grow and improve as much as possible.
Questions or comments for Ms. McGuire?
How's the feedback been from a quantity perspective for those surveys that you sent out? Are you getting feedback?
So as of this morning, there was 168 responses, and that included all staff and all parents. So I've reached out, like I said, to the PTO, the CSA, the positive, and asked them to send it out as well. I've also invited myself to their next meetings. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay. And then on the induction program and just sort of your use of the coach and whatnot, has there been anything that you've experienced here that was, I would say, thematically unexpected? Certainly stuff that you deal with behind the scenes that is probably case by case, but anything that we need to help you kind of from a support or other team-wise perspective that was unexpected?
I don't think so. I don't know if there's anything from your perspective. I think, I was lucky to work with Andrew and Kathy prior to this. Like I said, I have all sorts of support for all different scenarios that I can reach out to for coaching or for mentor. I need some of this. The community has been amazing. There's a parent who's an expert for anything. You reach out, we know about sleep, and we know about standards-based grading. So knock on wood, no huge surprises that we haven't had the support either internally or externally to tackle. So thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you, Beth.
Yeah, thank you.
That brings us to a report regarding the multi-tiered system of support from our Director of Student Services, Kate McCarthy.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Well, I'm just far from I could sit next at the
From a microphone.
Should I pop myself over there, or what should I do?
Do you want to just come sit next to Gita, closer? And then...
There we go.
Yeah, well,
There's a chair.
I'm waiting for you right here, so.
I want to get too close.
No.
Mark and I don't fight.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. So are you going to move through it and I'll just look at it over here?
Happy to.
That'd be fantastic. Okay, so I am not one for jargon, but I would love to say MTSS instead of multi-tiered systems for support many times. But really the piece I wanted to talk about tonight is all the great things that we're doing to support all students. So there is a state mandated structure that we have been employing for many years now. It used to be called RTI, Response to Intervention, and now it is Oh, we're on slide 3. Okay. Sorry. My overview of the agenda.
Okay, we're doing the
first.
agenda.
Okay. So I just wanted to talk about the structure in which I'll be talking about our systems. I could go on and on for many, many hours. This is a high-level review of how things look, really what the mandated structure is, how things look across the 2 different levels around elementary, which, happily Dover and Sherborn are very consistent in how they really have all the systems and structures in place. And then we have the 6 through 12 structure, which I'll also talk about, and things that we have put into place and things that we are also growing. And then the last piece is how we look at this to know whether what we're doing is making a difference and in supporting all students, and what data tools we have used for that. Good, next. So this is really the main, the piece that the state has talked about around, it's a framework for ensuring that all students receive supports. That is the kind of tiers that they talk about. So it's academic, behavioral, and social emotional. And it is really making sure that people understand that this is for all students. It's not kind of just the students who are struggling or students who are excelling. It's meeting students where they are and what is available to them at every level, and how districts need to make sure that they're using things that are evidence-based. And that's what I'll talk about that with the data tools a little bit. This is just another piece around the visual is, again, I think what we talk about a lot, and Beth had talked about with her goals as well, is these aren't new initiatives. We have always supported students in a variety of ways, both academic, behavioral, and social emotional. This just gives us more kind of levels and ways to identify what students need, as well as really making sure that we are meeting the needs for all students and reviewing that constantly. I think that's the piece. It's not like you set something in place and then you try again next year. You really look at everything within 6 to 8 week timeframes. Okay. So again, these pieces are district-wide. So when we think about what MTSS is in a school system, it really relies heavily on collaboration and data collection. So looking at ways to support students within the class, and when students are struggling, what do we do next? So just to go through the different meetings that happen each week. So the Student Success Team, SST, is a group of staff. This happens at every single building. Some buildings more often than others. Elementary, you'll see more of these meetings happening than maybe at the high school level, but the structures do exist, and it's one person is proposed, like a teacher or a counselor or an administrator will say, I want to really think about this one student and think about an intervention plan for this student. So the team will get together, review how the student has been doing, what concerns there are, and then putting together an intervention plan. And usually there's an intervention partner that goes along with the person who came and brought the student to the table. At times when a team has reviewed and tried interventions and the student has not made progress, an evaluation could be recommended through this, but really the main goal is, have we exhausted all options so that we don't jump to over-identifying students with a disability if they could be helped by some of the less restrictive levels. And then we have the student update meeting. So this is another meeting that I'm lucky enough to attend in each of the 4 buildings each week. It is administrators, all clinical professionals in the building, counselors, psychologists, staff attached to any social emotional program in the building, as well as, I think I said, administration and school counselors. So this is staff updating each other on things going on with students, with grade levels, with clusters, themes that we should be thinking about and supporting and problem solving together. So it meets every week, and from it could come maybe a referral to the SST group. It could result in some parent reach out, some community reach out. At times we'll talk about some students who maybe a mentoring structure might be helpful. So things come through that meeting as well that support students. Data teams are currently in place at the elementary level. We're working on what that would look like at the middle and the high school. I think last year and this year we've had some middle school check-ins around teams to look at how students are doing and look at the data too. But at the elementary level, they're actually right in the midst of a data sweep, they call it. If anyone went to Chickering today, they had like the cafe tables with like the fake, they're doing like the reading groups and the data collection and really getting students to really get involved and excited about all of these steps. So, so right now they're gathering a lot of that data and they'll be meeting for these data teams next week to look at within the last 6 to 8 weeks, students who were in interventions, how are they going? What did the numbers look like? Grade-wise, they look at the entire grade together as a teaching team. So that will be happening next week. I think we can go to the next one. So this is the basic tenets of the tiers. So the thought is that in Tier 1, 80 to 90% of students will respond at this level. So they would not need any added layer. They will make progress from what's happening in the general education classroom by their teacher. So this is a lot of the work that's done by coaches. This is the curriculum look. This is really what a teacher does, best practices. Second tier is what I was just talking about through some of those systems, a 6 to 8 week intervention that's targeting a certain area that we've seen as a area not making progress and looking at things to try and looking at that data every 6 to 8 weeks. A lot of times when that is not effective and there's still concern, that's still not a time to jump to special education or evaluation or anything. The next level would be something, maybe it's daily, maybe it's outside of the class, maybe it's one-on-one, maybe it's one adult with 2 students. So there's still more levels even after the tier 2, though that is a much smaller population of students. Title I. So we're lucky enough that a lot of different supports that we provide. So Title I is a federally mandated program, and it helps to identify students in need of supports. And one just positive piece to add to this discussion is that a lot of Title I supports, financial supports, are funneled to our Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventionists and coaches and things available to all students. A lot of times Title I happens outside of the school day, maybe after school. This really allows us to have it happen during the school day. And all right, so just kind of quickly going at the 2 different levels. Elementary, students' experience within the system directly kind of falls in line with a classroom teacher providing supports and interventionists providing supports. At both of the elementary school level, we have interventionists that focus on reading and math, or literacy and math, and then we also have a counselor this year that's split between the 2 elementary schools that does this exact work. Tani Desjardins, that was at the middle school, has shifted down to really bring her experience at the middle school down to the elementary. She runs the 6 to 8 week groups for students, so the interventionists focus more on the academics, and she helps with the SEL supports. And so that's kind of how the students directly interact. The coaches, the math coach, literacy coach, SEL coach, and administration support kind of that work. So looking at curriculum, looking at things that are going on within the class and ways to look at curriculum differentiation and ways to a lot of times things happen through WIN groups, but also some of our interventionists can push into classes if there are certain things happening that they could allow some support to. So that's kind of how it looks at the elementary. This is similar to kind of the overall definition. It's just looking at what the tiers look like at the elementary level. So it's looking at things that are available to all students. I know we talk about the district curriculum accommodation plan as accommodations that are available to all students. That would be both in Tier 1 and Tier 2, just thinking about what's available to all students is kind of that universal piece. But then also, if you've identified like a cluster of accommodations through the DCAP that would work for certain students and you use them frequently and consistently, that could also be seen as tier 2. But also we just talked about tier 2 as thinking about having students have specific direction. Sometimes this can happen right in a general ed classroom where the teachers kind of break up things into certain groups and review things more directly with certain groups of students. So tier 2 can happen both outside and inside the classroom. And then tier 3 really would be all outside. It's something that's more differentiated to a student. Just to clarify, because I do get this question sometimes, tier 3 is not special education. Special education isn't even in the pyramid. So sometimes some districts think that's kind of where you get, it's still general ed. It's still ways that we can support students through some of our interventionists and some of our coaches as well. And then we're moving on to the region. So one thing I will say is that those things that everything I just talked about at the elementary level, I think we're on our 4th year of all of that being in place and kind of growing. I would say at the region, we're definitely, every year since I've been here, there's been more structures, more supports, and more staffing, and we're really growing as a region overall in this work. Some of the things that have gone on, specifically at the middle school level, we have added a literacy specialist that works both outside of the classroom and pushing into classrooms to deliver instruction and interventions with teachers and directly with students in that area. We've also been working with Katie Novak, who's a specialist in universal design for learning, which is really just trying to figure out the best way for students to engage in academics and connect with curriculum and really respond. And so she's been working with the state and with us on MTSS overall and she's been helping too to think about how to really create interventions in a middle school model that are consistent within the structure that we have and the schedule that we have. And she's been also weighing in and helping us think about how is the schedule that we have? How is it really meeting the needs of all students? And we also are and I think one of the things that's been nice in the past few years has been the flex block at the high school and looking at what can it be? And what I really like about the high school is that they have been really trying to identify and get feedback for what that should be so that it's sustainable, so that we don't put too many things into flex block and then we can't keep that going. One other piece that is happening both at the middle and the high school is we've increased counseling every single year since I've been here. And so it's been nice because I think in many years past, students on IEPs were the ones who got counseling, and that was how our structure was built as far as what we could support. And now we have just so many different ways that students can be supported with counseling and intervention, so that it doesn't have to be someone who's identified as a student with a disability that needs it through special education. All right. So all of this is wonderful, but how do we know? And this was actually a quote shared by Allison Gullings-Rude, who has really been a great thought partner for all things MTSS. So obviously an intervention is only an activity if we don't have data to support it. So thinking about data, I've already talked about a lot of the groups that look at it, but thinking about literacy, math, SEL, our coaches have helped with identifying tools that would be, I'm going to go down to the data sources. Keep going. So these are some of the data sources that filter in the areas that we've been supporting. Obviously, some will be very familiar. These are just some examples on how we track progress, in addition to, obviously, teacher data, like daily feedback, family feedback, and school teams. But Dibbles, Fontes, and Pinnell, IXL, so I'm not going to read all these, but the one thing I'll say about social emotional is we are to the point now where we are providing 3 separate SEL surveys in order to understand. I think we had kind of built up to it with 1 and then 2 and trying to find times. And we are getting through our second round at the elementary levels right now so that they're ready for the data pieces. And we look at all the same areas. And so every year when a student kind of moves to the next grade or moves on, that data really can be accessed by anyone supporting them. And it's really how connected they feel, some areas that they feel strong in, and some things that they may need some help in. That data is helpful to us to create some of those short-term 6 to 8 week counseling groups that Tani provides, as well as just giving teachers information as to how their students are doing beyond kind of their own interactions. These are some snapshots of what our data dashboard, so all of those pieces of information filter into a data dashboard. And this is kind of what you see as a teacher looking at the data dashboard, some things pulling quickly up attendance, behavior, and how they scored on the SEL survey if they took it and did not opt out. The piece I will say when we meet as a student update meeting and we'll review is attendance. A lot of times looking at the interesting part of the dashboard that's in a different screen is it actually gives you the calendar and which days are missed. So sometimes you'll catch that, oh, most Mondays this student is struggling. Should we put something in place proactively to check in with them first thing in the morning? So that can be helpful as far as what you see when you log into the dashboard. The next piece is literacy assessment. So this is the Fountas and Pinnell and Dibbles looking at just where the data points stand in the 3 a year that we collect. Again, it's helpful for short-term pieces. You can also dive really deep into how students do and learn kind of themes and trends of kinds of questions that students get wrong through that tool as well. And then this is an intervention plan. So this lives within the data dashboard and also does stay with the student. So if you're a teacher that has a student this year, and this could be an intervention plan from last year, one of the big pieces of positive feedback from staff that are using the dashboard would be that they really have a lot of carryover information and don't have to start from scratch and can see where students have maybe needed some interventions in years past. And that's it. This is quite a culmination. So last summer we worked with Katie Novak's team and really most all counselors in the district and teacher leaders and did like a whole day of what is MTSS and what are our layers and where do we kind of dive deeper. And we created this visual specifically for Dover-Sherborn as a team. And it really is kind of a visual for all the great things happening for all of our students when it comes to MTSS. So we thought we'd share it at the end.
So if I could just point out, because I know some of our teachers who worked on this would be very proud, that the clouds include the academic, social, and behavioral needs of all of our students that we're trying to meet the whole child's needs. What was a Sitco sign shows you the 3 tiers of intervention. You have the Charles River running between Dover and Sherborn with Boston and our Metco students in the background. So it really brings together the whole idea of supporting all of our kids in all of the realms. Thank you, Kate.
Yep, that's it for me.
I could just reiterate a couple things before we ask for questions. The first is, luckily this work started before the pandemic, and then coming out of the pandemic, seeing all of the academic needs of our kids, social, emotional, behavioral needs of our kids, thank goodness we started this work ahead of time. It continues to be refined. It's not perfect yet, but at least we had a lot of the systems in place, and we continue to add data resources and now a data dashboard that allows us to track students either across a grade or look at specific classrooms or look at individual kids and their needs and include the interventions and supports that do or don't work for them, so that it's not a whole new learning curve when the child transitions to a new classroom and a new teacher the following year. It's also thanks to the support of the taxpayers in the district that we have lots of these new positions, including additional counselors, interventionist coaches that support all of this work. And just a nod to Dover-Sherborn, because in a very Dover-Sherborn way, Katie Novak is working with cohorts of people from across the district in a 3-year training model. So she might have 10 people from Brockton and 10 people from Lowell and 10 people from Ashland working with her kind of on a set schedule with workshops and classes. And we said, we want individualized attention, so would you come work with us here in our context and help our folks? So we've been lucky enough to have Katie here in our buildings, all 3 levels, and for some summer workshop days. So.
Judy? Yeah, this looks really spectacular, and the evidence-based analysis of the work is really crucial. My question has to do with children who are on IEPs, who have IEPs. Does this MTSS, is it a precursor to being on an IEP? Is it sometimes supplementary? Mm-hmm. How does that work for like students? You know, sometimes a student isn't identified as having disability until they're in the 4th grade. Mm-hmm. How do you use those tools? Do you use them together, and how does that process work?
I have 2 ways to answer that question. One, it's a question I get often. So what I reinforce with groups of teachers and special educators is every student, even students on IEPs, must have access to these tiers, mm-hmm. because you'd be excluding students with disabilities, right, if you didn't. However, it can get confusing for people because they say if there's a concern, the special ed team, generally that's been the go-to. I would say what has been really nice, if you have an IEP with and you have a math disability, all your services are in the area of math, but a social emotional concern comes along. That's not for your special education team to talk about. That's for you to be supported through these tiers so that you're supported through the least restrictive environment. Does that answer your question about how special ed? So everything kind of on all of the levels that we just talked about. The only difference is if you're on an IEP with an identified disability in an area, you shouldn't be doing it through the tier. Specialized instruction should be how your needs are met for your disability-related needs.
Yeah, the question I have, though, maybe sort of a follow-up to that is, I like the idea of the 6 to 8 week program that's put together and the read on how are we doing, which is very different from the IEP process, which is, well, at least for the parents, once a year you have the IEP meeting. Now, obviously the special ed teachers meet with the students much more mm-hmm. frequently. But has that at all informed how or changed how special ed and IEPs, are administered? And is there that evidence-based feedback for some shorter period of time?
I would say at this point, what it has informed has been, and this is part of our special ed review, that we don't have the full report yet, but some of the feedback I'm receiving so far is, in the 4 years since our MTSS program has grown, the amount of students that we're evaluating and finding eligible mm-hmm. is much more in line, which means we are evaluating students who, from these interventions, have not made progress, and we have more honed right. evaluation process. So I would say that that's one piece. I think one of the aspects of special education is progress monitoring, and I think there's more around progress reports, but then there's also kind of the monthly consultations where we do look at data and we amend at times. Mm-hmm. I still think if we feel like a student has a disability that requires a specialized level of licensure and experience, then that will still live in special education. But what I do keep, and the kind of first part of your question is making sure that all students have access to the tiers. So obviously tier 1 is everybody, and then that's that piece. And I do think the more work we do in classrooms, even for students on IEPs, that can be more whole class and things that we try for everyone, it just broadens the experience and the support for all students. I still think when it's an identified area of disability and we say you need services in that area, that's still going to live within special education, but we just want to make sure that it's not that because you have special education, you can't live in any of the tiers, but that's a good piece around feedback and data collection. I think we are always working on giving more frequent feedback for students on IEPs and not.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about elementary school and these tiers for myself to understand. So, for example, tier 2 is kind of like the WIN program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what is tier 3? Is it again part of
probably the WIN program with more intensity and frequency? So the WIN at times, and again, I'm not sure grade level how many times. I know there are certain students in receiving tier 3 that it might be daily. So if your WIN is not daily, I think in like 4th and 5th grade, it's not daily. And there could be students who receive maybe something like a lunch bunch that's an additional piece on top of WIN. So I know that WIN is a consistent time that students do, if they're in an intervention, receive that support.
Yeah.
And so tier 3, I think, would be kind of WIN and then some, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, so these time, like 6 to 8 weeks, is there any structured communication to the families, or is this just, is it formal, basically formal report to the families that your kid has been in this program for 6 weeks?
Yes.
She or he started at this point, now they are at this point.
Yes. That is communicated to families through, I'm not sure, I think it's the interventionists, or the teachers actually, sorry. The teachers communicate with the families around the interventions that are in place, and the information funnels through the teacher.
Okay. And then also, is MCAS scores also kind of looked at with these data that we are collecting to see if these programs are being effective in improving MCAS? I know this is not the only thing, but it's an objective.
Yeah, it definitely filters into the dashboard, and it's a data point. I think what's hard about the MCAS, it's a moment in time, and it's once. And the other data points that I mentioned, you can do more frequently, and you can gather a little bit more about item analysis, like what cluster of kinds of questions did students struggle with. You can do that with MCAS as well. Yeah. So I think definitely it's part of the picture, but I do think the thing about MCAS that's tough is that it happens once and then you're kind of to the next year. So definitely part of the equation, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
The WIN program is not unique to Dover-Sherborn, though. Like, all school districts have to have something like this, right? It's like a mandate. It might not be called WIN, but
right.
What you're talking about, the way it's implemented in Dover-Sherborn may be unique, but this is like required. It's not something that like we're going out on a limb to support students. Like in a specific, I guess I'm trying to say this is mandated. Yes. And so it's a lot of extra work that is mandated by the state that obviously we're like implementing in a really awesome way. And then the other thing I was just going to say is the dashboard is remarkable, and whether your student is receiving intensive services or not, it does really provide your current teacher and your next year teacher like a glimpse of a child that you would never in the past have had. So we're really lucky to have something like that.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, just to follow up on Goldie's question, but more for the middle and high school level, I assume it's fairly common for students to flow in and out of tier 1 and 2, and maybe less so into tier 3. But since in middle school and high school they don't have one classroom teacher, what is well, when are parents informed of that? Like if my student was kind of hovering in tier 2, and would I know that? Would that be communicated?
If there was an intervention in place, that would be tier 1. I think
it's more everything.
Exactly. It's just what's in place. I think when it's tier 2 and there's an added layer and something beyond your schedule, that's when the communication. I know the literacy specialist communicates if they're working with the student. And so that comes at the middle school because you have so many teachers, that comes through the specialists themselves or a counselor if a student's in a lunch bunch or if a student's in a workstation, that's communicated through the people, either the counselor or the people delivering the intervention.
Can I piggyback on that too? So in the elementary version of this program, you have that single point of contact, if you will,
right.
The classroom teacher who's able to take a holistic view at a student and able to say, I'm seeing a need for additional support in this area. Maybe it's a particular math skill or it's a social and emotional piece or a literacy piece. And then they can help to kind of pull in the interventionists as needed and go through these different levels of support. Is there an analog in the middle school or high school of somebody who has any holistic view of a student?
I would say the school counselor would be my best answer. However, if a student's coming through SST and there's an intervention and English and reading and literacy is really the main concern, your best point of contact will be the person delivering that instruction, either through the ELA teacher or the interventionist that's supporting them. So I would say the school counselor would be my first answer because they're the ones at the student update meeting, they're at SST, they're at the team meetings with the middle school groups to really have a lot of that information. But there's two of them. So sometimes if a different point of contact home would be a better, like if there's a math or a more academic focused, that would probably be more of a more logical point of contact. But as someone who has functioned at the middle school and the high school, the school counselor would kind of be the quick answer to that holistic view and having the most contact with the teachers and staff throughout the building. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Sorry to ask a question piggybacking on that. Like, I understand how it works in the elementary school. Like, it's really easy to quickly notice, oh, this kid's like hopping back and forth from needing intervention, not needing intervention because there's one person. But like in the middle school, that is a little confusing. Like if somebody's hopping in and out of math interventions, the school counselor is going to pick up on that, or the math teacher would be the one hopefully to notice?
I would say it would probably be in conjunction because what the school counselor has is kind of a picture of what that student's receiving overall. So if I'm a school counselor, I know if the math teacher may not know if they're in a lunch bunch or they're seeing this person after school, what they're doing during H block. So they really do bring that whole picture. The school counselors go to at least 2 different meetings. There's like an MTSS and guidance meeting once a cycle that they meet with every teacher on their team. So I do think that if there's a math concern and there's math pieces that the teacher, they get to talk with the teacher at those meetings to talk about that. I think what's hard sometimes is some students might need different, like multiple areas of intervention. And so how much time in the day you have is really then the problem solving that you do. So a lot of times what I see is the problem solving happening at those teams of, okay, I'm going to have the student this day after school, you're going to have them this day. So it's really kind of a team plan when a student's struggling. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I do think a school counselor is kind of that person that wraps it all together and has that communication with each of the teams and every teacher.
I think to your point before, the dashboards are fantastic, is going from grade to grade. Are those ever shared with parents?
Yeah, I was just saying the same thing. It's like more informative than an actual report card.
Yeah, the report card's not super useful.
At the moment, I think it is not, but I know that if certain things are asked for, then it's a student file, so anything can be seen. But I think because we're constantly like adding data points and information, we haven't yet, and that's not usually the structures of schools that have used the data dashboards prior to us, but it could definitely be something that we talk about.
It just, again, like, we are so lucky that, like, because this happens so frequently, literally no kid at any moment in time could fall behind. Whereas before, like, kids drop off the radar and you just don't know that, like, this moment in time, something's happening at home or something, they've hit an academic challenge that you could just, like, miss.
Right.
So, bravo.
I have a quick question. Are all staff trained in using the data dashboard? Like, would they know how to enter or add data if they wanted to?
They have been given access and received training each year to like a different extent. And I think one of the things that it's most kind of where I've seen it most in buildings has been like it's brought to the data teams at the elementary. That's kind of what you're looking at and the data that you're seeing. At the middle school level, it's definitely something we pull up when we're talking about a student in SST. So any teacher at the middle and high school level that brings a student up, that's really what you tap into. I will also say that the data that's collected in the 5th grade year for math is shared with the incoming 6th grade group. So I know through those transition years and through some of the functionality that you like need it in order to kind of know the full picture. So training's been definitely there. And I do think just from the data meetings, elementary may be using it a bit more, but it's definitely been something that I've worked with Sarah Collins a lot at the middle school. She's done trainings at every single team as to like the functionality and what it looks like too. So definitely the training is there. I think what we're trying to balance is kind of what's useful for teachers. Like when and where do they need maybe some kind of check-ins on that.
And I think the counselors at the middle and high school have really bought into it as well because they can see their population of students. So if all of a sudden someone's attendance just falls off or someone's SEL survey just shows that they need support or their grades drop, they get alerted. So it's not like you have to every day be combing through your kids' attendance reports and grade reports to find these things out. And you can not only track kids by what students are in front of you in your class or what your caseload assignment is as a counselor, but some of our teachers are also coaches, so they can identify the kids on their baseball team and also see, oh, so-and-so's grades just dropped off. We need to have a little chat. So that's neat.
Yeah, and you can define it by grade population. If you want to look at students with the IEPs and how they kind of did with the SEL survey, like you can really look at the information and cluster it to your interest too.
What prompts data entry? So clearly like attendance, a test result, kind of hard binary things, but like if a teacher's sitting there in math class, either in elementary school or in a middle school, and they just see that Johnny seems off, does that prompt a data entry or what other kinds of?
So no, I think what happens is that would prompt a reach out to a counselor who would probably bring information to other groups. I think the information gathering is prompted usually through kind of assessments, grade level assessment, like all those tools that we talked about, as well as if there's an intervention and a teacher adds information as to how the student's doing on the intervention, that's put into Panorama. So those data points happen usually when you're collecting data on a certain concerning area. I don't know if there's any other kind of Pine Hill might probably. I think there are some things that they were trying to focus on.
I think if it's a one-time thing or you're noticing someone's off, you do have a conversation with the counselor or the parent saying, is there something I should know about? But when it becomes a pattern, that's usually when you bring it to the student support team or the SUM team and say, we need to have a conversation about this child and kind of put all the heads together, the counseling head, the behavior head, and say, what supports can we try? What might have been effective last year? How can we bring the parent in? And then that kind of starts the intervention plan that you see documented in the dashboard.
Well, basically, for every elementary student, I'm just familiar with that, 3 times a year in math and reading, data is inputted, right?
And SEL.
In SEL. And then if a kid's put on an intervention because of whatever was seen from that data, every 6 to 8 weeks you reassess and that data is put in. So you have those 3 mile markers and then the little mile markers in between that show you if your intervention is working or not, so you can change course. but 3 times a year, every student is like checked in on specifically on those assessments you were sharing.
I have one other question. Pardon the pun, but it is a multi-tiered question. So on the SEL, understand that at the middle school and high school, I think you said it's survey, so it's the actual student themselves filling it out?
Grades 3 and up, it's survey.
Grades 3 and up. So we're trusting the elementary school kids to do a survey on their own social emotional. Is that the data that's going into that?
And K to 2, it's teachers filling
It's
that
teachers.
out.
And then, so we've invested a fair bit in the interventionists across the district here. Have we scaled oversight, administration, programmatic support to ensure that if we now have 10 or 12 people running around the district, where 4 years ago we had 3 or 4, that the appropriate level of administration and programmatic kind of governance to ensure that that's all humming, efficient, and doing everything that we kind of assume is happening?
Yes,
Is that
so
scaled
there's
as well?
there's weekly meetings with the coaches and the interventionists and administration. So it's the structures in place, the interventions in place, and looking at kind of the lesson planning and what's being delivered by interventionists. At the middle school level, there's one, so it's a bit easier of an oversight. And so that person actually is overseen by both gen ed and special ed. So I both meet with them as well as the assistant principal here.
But I guess, and maybe I'm not thinking about it right, maybe we had 4 or 5 people, or, function in those roles 5 years ago. We now have 10. Is it the same number of people that those interventionists are meeting with to kind of coordinate and quarterback, or do we now have 3 or 4 administrators doing that because there's just a ton more data, there's more meetings, there's more stuff?
Yep. Did you want to?
I was just going to say, Denny. So Kate was mentioning that the building-based meetings. So, for example, at Chickering, Kate and Naomi O'Brien, the coordinator of special education there, and Jim Carnes meet regularly with the coaches and the interventionists to make sure they're kind of all working together and doing things systematically. But then Denny's the glue that kind of holds the 2 elementary schools together and then supports the middle school to make sure that it kind of projects up. Again, it's very different at the middle school because they don't have the 3 times a year dibbles like we do. We're starting to, use IXL in math and literacy at the middle school level more regularly to get those touch points. But we're not there yet, which is why Katie Novak's trying to help us, because middle school is more independent, and then once you get to high school, you have 8 different teachers and they're never the same for any one child. So how do you work around that? But
So I guess I'll ask my question differently then. It doesn't feel like we had an assistant superintendent, apologize, 4 or 5 years ago, right? We don't have. Do you feel as though we have the appropriate level of support for the additional people that we have throughout the district? Because I'm not getting the sense that we've scaled that side of the equation. We have scaled the number of people providing direct hand-to-hand combat kind of support.
I think so. I don't think we've outgrown the model yet.
Yeah, so far, my time, one of the things that's been nice is Kate and I have been having monthly meetings with our elementary coaches. Okay. So far it feels manageable. I think certainly in the future it's something that we can revisit, but right now it feels like a really good system where we're meeting with coaches, they're giving information to interventionists, to teachers. One of the things I've been really impressed with coaches is that they've been able to distill a lot of the data and make it less intimidating for teachers. They have protocols, they have ways to talk about data that it doesn't feel so scary for the teachers, and those are all things that Kate and I discuss with them in our monthly coaches meetings as well.
And I'll say that's one shift. It used to be that Barb and Allison and Deb and Jim oversaw the coaches within their buildings, which made it tough because some of them are shared, but they still just kind of were looking over their own kingdoms. It wasn't until this year that Denny said, okay, I'm going to bring both teams together from both schools, and we're going to do some calibration and coordination of services. So we're starting to scale up, I guess.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right. Thank you very much, Kate. We appreciate it.
Thanks for letting me sit with you.
All right. right, this brings us to the report concerning the equity audit recommendations. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So as you know, last year we had NYU working with us to collect data from surveys and focus groups. In September, we had a presentation amidst all of you with their findings. And since then, we have been looking at the findings and figuring out what's next. So tonight we have a draft of what's next could look like, but it needs lots more eyes and feedback from stakeholder groups, as I mentioned. And this is one arm of the strategic plan we'll be looking at next September when I collect all of the information from stakeholders for the entry plan. So one part might be meeting the needs of all students, another might be part of innovative teaching and learning, one might be about resource efficiency or special education. So this is a draft, and it's going to morph over time as we get more input and more information and we get closer to having a full-fledged strategic plan. That said, in the spirit of being reflective, in my attempts to be very transparent about the equity audit to people, just as where you spend your money says a lot about you, where you send your communication says a lot about you. So as I've been trying to over-communicate about equity, and I'm not sure how many people read the newsletters because they're quite lengthy and have a lot of information, people think all I do all day is equity. And I just want to say that, yes, it's a top priority for me, but there are a lot of other things I do all day. I just don't communicate about them. So I'm caught between, in reading the feedback that I've got through the entry survey, people saying, you're not doing enough fast enough with the equity audit and we need to know more all the time. And enough people saying, enough, we want to know what else you do all day and what our kids are doing all day. So I'm caught in the middle. So this is my attempt to say, here's the overall picture of how academic excellence continues for all kids through the equity lens. And some of my comments I did write out just because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. So some of this will be kind of in the moment talking and some of it will be reading from my notes. And I hope you're okay with that. All right, so district objectives. So as a reminder, our mission as a district is to inspire, challenge, and support all students as they discover and pursue their full potential. Their full potentials are not the same, and we don't expect them to be. So someone who has high potentials for computer science and robotics, we want to make sure we support them, as well as the musician, as well as the football player. So we need to meet their individual potentials as a district. And to what end? We want to make sure that our graduates are prepared to go on and face success in college, career, and life in a rapidly changing world. What's interesting sitting from this seat right now is we survived the pandemic. Many of us sat through many long meetings about that, but we now have a generation of very young parents who don't know much about challenge success and don't know much about the portrait of a graduate. So we really need to go back and do a lot of work in re-educating people about both of those initiatives. And here you see the emblem from the portrait of a graduate, where it reminds us that we're preparing kids to solve problems in a world where we can't even imagine what the problems are going to be when they're 35. And so, yes, we need to focus on the academics and the math and the science content, but we also want to make sure that they're developing critical thinking, collaboration, communication skills that they can apply to any content and anything Google tells them to solve a problem. A reminder of our core values: commitment to community, equity and excellence, respect and dignity, climate of care. A reminder that We Are DS was not intended to mean we are DS, we're the best, we're number one. It's we are DS, we're a community, and it's this commitment to community and all of these values that we share together. I also want to point out that equity and excellence are in our core values. They were there before Andrew launched the equity audit, so this has really been a focus. And they're not opposed to each other, they're one and the same, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So academic excellence is at the foundation of Dover-Sherborn schools. We are built on that. We have a history of academic excellence, and we want to maintain that. I know that because my children are attending here. That's why my husband and I sacrificed all of our income to buy a house here. John is a graduate. My husband is a graduate. He and his 3 siblings from Dover-Sherborn. Unfortunately, my in-laws sold their house before we could afford it, so we had to start from scratch, but here we are. I see the academic excellence as an educator in the classrooms, and Denny does as well, that I visit every day. I previously worked at an elite boarding school and know academic excellence from that perspective, as well as an exam school that continually ranks #1 every year. So academic excellence is present, and it's going to be maintained here in Dover-Sherborn. I also want to mention that throughout the entry process, the first question is, what do you value about the Dover-Sherborn schools? Hands down, doesn't matter who I'm talking to, the answer is the schools. We moved here for the schools. So I understand that academic excellence is a priority of the district, and we want to make sure it continues to be a priority of the district for every child. For those who are already exceeding academically, we want to continue to push them to reach their potential. Those in the middle, we want to push them to move up towards their potential, and those who are struggling to provide all the supports that Kate just referenced. So academic excellence, just as a reminder, it's a very complex term. At its core, academic excellence is the achievement of high levels of proficiency and mastery in academic subjects. It is often defined by high test scores, grades, and graduation rates. However, academic excellence is a complex and multifaceted concept that involves more than just good grades and test scores. Academic excellence also involves the development of students' non-cognitive skills, such as self-control, motivation, and persistence. A study published in the journal Educational Researcher found that non-cognitive skills are at least as important as cognitive skills in promoting success in school and in life. Developing these skills can help students to become more resilient, self-motivated, and successful learners. Moreover, academic excellence is not only about what students know, but also about how they apply that knowledge. For instance, a report by the Partnership for 21st Century Learning, which is behind the portrait of a graduate, highlighted the importance of creating learning experiences that are rigorous and relevant and that provide opportunities for students to apply their knowledge and skills in real-world contexts. It's also important to note that academic excellence is not a fixed concept, but rather is an ever-evolving one. And educational as societal needs change, academic excellence should be redefined to reflect that. Additionally, academic excellence should be inclusive and equitable, providing equal opportunities for all students to reach their full potential, regardless of their background or abilities. Equity and excellence are not a zero-sum game. There are not a finite number of resources in Dover-Sherborn, thankfully. There are not a finite number of small groups for instruction. There are not a finite number of adjustment counselors, not a finite number of special educators, not a finite number of honors or AP level courses, not a finite number of spots on the math team. The goal is to ensure all students have the resources they need to reach their full potential. We need multiple layers of support, as Kate mentioned, so that all students grow and develop academically, socially, emotionally, and behaviorally. We need ladders of intervention and multiple entry points for students to gain access to rigorous courses beyond 6th grade when they're first leveled. In Dover-Sherborn, past practice proves that we do not take from those already excelling to provide to those who aren't yet. Our community has been generous in supporting additional personnel and programming to support all students, coaches, interventionists, counselors, skills classes, goals, grit, bridge, the list goes on, all while ensuring that students have access to honors and AP courses, virtual classes, math, science, debate, music competitions, internships, senior projects, and an array of field trips around the world. Our goal is to continue to support and push every child to their full potential, those currently struggling, those currently meeting grade level benchmarks, and those currently excelling. This will not change. The pie will not be redistributed. The pie will continue to grow as we find additional ways to inspire, challenge, and support all kids. That said, if you look, and Denny and I have been doing more work going back to our grounding and pedagogy, there is research that shows factors that are evidence-based that improve academic achievement for students, and they're listed here. Having high-quality teachers who are highly trained and highly effective in the classroom obviously improves achievement. Setting high expectations for kids, they want to grow and aspire. Creating a positive school culture and climate, we all know that a sense of belonging has scientifically been proven to have better test results, better attendance, better feelings about school. Providing appropriate and adequate resources, as Kate mentioned, making sure that kids have what they need to grow and learn, offering targeted support, again, as necessary to kids along the way. Addressing non-academic barriers addresses things that might not happen during the school day, but certainly affect a child's ability to learn, whether it's access to health care, whether it's bias and discrimination, whether it's support at home. Encouraging parent and community involvement. Clearly, we all want to work together to support our kids, and the stronger the bond, the stronger the child will thrive. And cultivating a growth mindset, that it's not fixed, our intelligence isn't fixed, our talents aren't fixed, we can continue to grow over time, no matter how old or young we are. So, that said, we are going to revisit this research in a few minutes because we are going to talk about the potential next steps we want to take relative to the equity audit and how they support these research-based factors to support academic excellence for all kids. In the meantime, not only do we have the research and the data from the equity audit, Denny was just going to refresh us on the other whys of this work and why it's important.
So bear with me. I've been up since 3:30, 2-month-old. Let's see what happens. So this is just a reminder that a lot of the working initiatives around diversity, equity, and inclusion are not specifically within this vacuum of Dover-Sherborn. They're given to us as mandates from the federal government and our state governments. So state and federal laws emphasize the idea of civil rights for all, about non-discrimination, about non-exclusion. So we are continuing to institute things and to follow up with practices that are in line with the state and federal laws that we have as well. Also have specific state laws that talk about equal educational opportunities for all of our students, the importance of providing access in multiple ways for all of our students to access, and then specifically a lot of the most recent ones coming from the state and from DESE have been around the protections around students and students' gender. So those are kind of the most updated ones that, again, we are just following what the state is saying and what DESE is telling us we need to do. Other DESE mandates as well talk about the importance of understanding different points of view. And for those of you that might be in the elementary literacy world, you're probably familiar with this idea of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, that we want our students to be able to see their identities in the curriculum and what they're learning in school. We want them to be able to have entry points to see other people's identities and things that might not be their identities. And this idea of sliding glass doors, allowing our students to be able to kind of step into new experiences, gain a sense of empathy. And that's all in a lot of the guidance that we've gotten from the state. You can see it here referenced specifically in the standards. So it references the importance of these diverse perspectives in the English frameworks, and the one that I'm, of course, most familiar with, the social studies frameworks. There are very specific things laid out in the state standards about where we're including topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is just one example from the first grade standards that talks about discussing the role of families and the diversity of different families. Again, that's part of the state curriculum that we're following those frameworks on. Other places where this pops up in the state is through our teacher rubric. So through the teacher evaluation system, we are asking our teachers to use evidence-based practices. We're using them to use inclusive practices. Standard 2 of the teaching rubric talks about the importance of creating a classroom community that supports all students, having those structures in place where students feel that sense of belonging. It talks about culturally responsive teaching as well. And one of the things that is currently being worked on in DESE right now is revising that teacher rubric. They've released what that version, a working version of that looks like, and it really goes more in depth about drawing upon students' experiences and their identities in order to inform instruction and assessment. So you can see, again, that this is something that the state is continuing to lean into as well. Another thing that we know, which is the big, why are we doing this work, why is this important, is the student voice. So we've had opportunities in multiple ways to hear from our students through the alumni letter that I know came before I was here in Dover-Sherborn, through the equity audit where we had a lot of focus groups and surveys with our students. And I think very specifically on November 28th during the Professional Development Day, we had a student panel of students representing all sorts of different diverse backgrounds. And they spoke about their experiences in Dover-Sherborn, about what have made them feel really included, things that they wish could be changed in their educational experiences, things that they would tell their younger selves. And I think that was really, really powerful opportunity for our staff to hear from the students themselves. And we talked about it before. We said that, these are the people that are here on stage, but there are all sorts of other voices that we're not hearing from. So we know from our students why this is important. And in talking to teachers, it's really incredible how many of them go back to that day and they say, I need to do this work because of those student voices. It really resonated with all of our faculty and our staff on that day.
Can I just jump in for a second? One of the questions that came up was the student panel and the diversity of students on the student panel and how they did represent mostly marginalized subgroups of students, and why wasn't it 80% white students and 10% special education. And I think the reason is we know a majority of our students do well and thrive in the Dover-Sherborn Public Schools. We know that from grades, we know that from college entrance, we know that from exit surveys, we know that from talking to them, we know that through the Metro West data, we know that through challenge success data, through the annual school climate data. We have lots of data that suggests that. However, there is a small group of students that have indicated that Dover-Sherborn is not supporting all of their needs. And so I was trying to liken it to going to the doctors. If you go to the doctors and you're saying, I'm having chest pains, they're not going to send you to a podiatrist to check your toes. They're going to want to investigate what's going on with your heart. So in this case, because we are trying to solve a problem that involves, unfortunately, our BIPOC students or LGBTQ students or our students with disabilities, we need to talk to those voices and hear from those voices to find out what's going wrong and what can we do better. Thank you.
I agree. The results of the survey show that roughly a third of our white students can't say that they feel like they belong. 63% of our students with disability, 61% of our non-white students, 53% of our LGBTQ students said they feel like they're part of the school. But you can see these numbers leave a lot of room for improvement. Thinking about 40% of our students, that's a significant amount of the students that don't necessarily feel like they belong. And we want to, as Beth said, we want to continue for the students that are doing well to continue on that track and feel like they belong. And we want to bring the rest of the students to a point where they feel like they have a place where they can come, where they feel like they can belong and be accepted as well. So the process of going through the findings from the equity audit went through many iterations, and there were many eyes that got to help debrief and think more about what the NYU equity audit said. As a leadership team, we unpacked the document, and then you can see that at each of the buildings, Beth and I attended faculty meetings and went through an exercise with the teachers and the staff where they looked at the results from the equity audit. They thought about what things could be prioritized, what are things we really want to do first, what are things that are more long-term goals. So we have a really wide representation from the leadership team, from the staff. We had a DSA meeting where we invited members of the community to come and talk and debrief. We had the community event with Dr. Hoyt in November on the 16th, where there was another opportunity to unpack as a community the findings from the equity audit. And then Beth synthesized all of this information, and we looked for the commonalities of where were people saying that this should be a short-term priority, where are people saying this should be a long-term priority, and we tried to take all that information and kind of put it into various categories and to synthesize it. Additionally, all this information has been shared with the community, and we've had, through the superintendent's entry plan survey, through other ways, opportunities for people to give their feedback about the equity audit. So some of that has been through emails with Beth and I, meetings and conversations that we've had. And we wanted to make sure that it has felt like an inclusive practice.
Thank you. So that said, you can imagine the amount of paperwork, electronic or hard copy, that came from all of these groups going through the equity audit and giving all of their opinions about what's a priority and what needs to wait. So we had to start somewhere with a straw man, because had I asked everyone to do that in the community and gotten 4,000 inputs, we already didn't have much of a December vacation. I don't know what we would have to give up the year to figure this out. So we took what we have from these groups and synthesized a straw man, which is what you're going to see tonight. And then we need additional feedback. And again, as we get more information about other priorities moving forward, we will shift and move. But it's a starting point, and our offices were quite ugly with all the paper. So on the bottom of each of the slides, you'll notice that this is a draft timeline that may change based on stakeholder feedback and other strategic priorities identified through the superintendent's entry process. This is just a draft, a starting point. So what we did is we went back to these research-based, evidence-based factors that affect student achievement and said, what can we glean from the equity audit to support these factors for all of our kids? Those who are already excelling, those who are meeting benchmark, and those who are struggling. And as you've already had a chance to preview, we're not going to read through every slide. We'll just give you a few highlights.
Yep. So yeah, to kind of translate it from the 6 findings from the equity audit into these 8 categories now, relating to academic excellence. So this first one about providing high quality instruction. One of the biggest things we're doing short term that just launched last week is a curriculum audit. So we're having teachers look through their curriculum materials and think about how it promotes equity. Part of that piece, and I think I'm going to be talking about this more in depth at a later school committee meetings next month, part of it is about representation and the things that you would think about, but a big part of it is about leveraging our teaching practices that we know promote equity, having high expectations for students, and having teachers go through their lessons and think, oh, are there high expectations set here? Having multiple ways for students to show that they understand something. So going through their lessons and materials, do students have an opportunity to show their understanding in a podcast, in a video, in a website that they build? So some of it is kind of that representation piece that you might think of when you hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, but a lot of it is about what are just the great teaching practices that we know are going to create great learning opportunities for all of our students. Kind of midterm, we want to continue to look at inclusive teaching practices, take a look at further at our assessments and how we can make our assessments more inclusive. And kind of one of the longer term goals is to continue to figure out ways to collaborate between the different buildings. And that's something that I've heard as a result of some of my entry plan meetings as well, is wanting to make sure that educators have more time together to collaborate. The second big bucket is about setting high expectations. As Beth mentioned, I think we want to continue on with figuring out how we define success and using challenge success and making sure that we're educating community members about that. So that's part of the short-term goals. Another important thing will just be looking at demographics and enrollment trends and figuring out in courses, who is taking which courses, who is in honors classes, who are in our college prep classes, and just analyzing what that data looks like. And then the more long-term goal is just looking at all the different levels that we have and figuring out ways that we can set high expectations for all of those levels. And I think one of the things that from my teaching and learning hat that I want to be clear on is that some people see things like this and they think, oh my goodness, we're going to detract, we're going to get rid of honors classes, and just to be very, very clear, that is not what is part of our plan here. We want to look at this information and see what it says, but that is not part of what we can foresee happening. So I don't want people to start getting afraid of that, because I know in the past that can be something that really worries people when they're thinking about academic excellence. It's not all of a sudden some of those things are going to start to go away. So you won't see that in our short, long-term, or midterm goals. Third one is about our inclusive climate. So thinking about bullying policy, which I know Bruce is going to have a read through of our bullying policy. One of the things that staff has talked to me about in my entry plan is responding to kind of bias incidents or hate language in the classroom and having a way to address it. So one of the things that we're going to start to talk about is this process of stop it, name it, claim it, to help give our teachers and our staff a tool that if they hear something that might be derogatory, that they have a way that they can go and talk about it with their students. And we're hoping that students adopt this as well. They're able to kind of call out things that they hear and have this tool, stop it, name it, claim it, in order to do that. Continuing to think about our religious observations, which we heard about in public comment. And then a big piece of this midterm and long term will be looking at our restorative justice practices, continuing to get our administrators and our counseling team with some PD and some training on restorative practices, and then in the future, rolling this out to other teachers and staff within the buildings so that they can do that as well. One of the things I'm excited about is just continuing to think about our peer leadership opportunities and giving a lot of that power to the students and feeling like they have a huge voice, because these are the things that affect them every day and how they feel. And then in our providing appropriate and adequate resources, continuing to think about professional development, making sure we're mapping out the wide range of professional development that we're offering teachers and looking for gaps in places where we can give teachers more professional development. One of the results from the survey from the November 28th, was that some teachers felt like they needed some more tools around microaggressions. So I went out and found some professional development to offer teachers. So just figuring out what our professional development menu looks like. And then, as I mentioned earlier, wanting to make sure that we're increasing time and capacity for our educators to collaborate. So that's, again, part of the entry plan. I've had some conversations with some phenomenal educators and staff, and I think that there's so much good knowledge in the district, and we just have to look for different ways for teachers to be able to share that knowledge across buildings, within a school, So figuring out ways to make that happen as well.
Right. In terms of offering targeted support, I'm not going to hone in on this because Kate did a great job presenting, but generally speaking, making sure that we are refining our MTSS system and that it's calibrated across buildings so that students feel that gradual release of expectations and skills as they go through from kindergarten to 12th grade, and that information that's appropriate gets passed on along the way. The non-academic barriers, this really focuses on making sure that there are clear and consistent protocols for students, teachers, parents to report bullying or bias-based incidents to an adult in the building, and making sure everybody, parents, students, faculty are aware of our expectations around behavior, and that when you go to the student handbook and you want to learn more about what the expectation is and what a potential consequence is, you can find it more readily than you can right now. We want to look at the behavior and discipline data. I know NYU started to look at that data. We'd like to look a little further at that. For good or for bad, the only information that is actually documented in our student information system are suspensions, which only tells you this much, luckily, of our student disciplinary information. So we'd love to look at, who's spending time in the office, who's having the conversations, who's having detentions, to make sure that we're supporting all of our kiddos fairly and consistently, and then calibrating our practices across the buildings over the long term. Parent and community involvement. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. So enlisting a consultant to help facilitate community conversations. We have Dr. Hoyt in that. Thank goodness for him. He meets with Denny and I regularly, and Denny and I are also juggling a lot of other balls around academics and supporting principals and those things. Thank goodness for him, because we'll have an idea, we'll talk about it. He goes off, he puts together a draft, brings it back when we're ready to move forward with it, because otherwise Denny and I would just be running circles around each other trying to get this work done. Provide opportunities for all community members to share hopes and apprehensions related to equity work in the school. So we had one community forum on November 16th. We have more coming up, which I'll talk about in a minute. And make sure that we're engaging all families to come to the table. Oftentimes families, because of a language barrier or because of transportation or childcare, aren't able to participate or choose not to participate. And we want to make sure that they feel fully welcomed and valued in participating. The midterm is really what came out of the November 16th community forum with Dr. Hoyt, there are a number of things that our parents and community members would like to discuss further so that they better understand this work. Here is a list of them here, and we want to make sure we provide opportunities for discussion and for learning around the focus on academic excellence. What is our goal for equity? The benefits of equity work for non-marginalized students. What does a culturally responsive curriculum look like? What is it that Denny's talking about when he talks about that? What does it look like on a practical level? When we talk about restorative practices, what does that mean? And why are we doing that? And why do you have to do that now? Because the state's mandating it. How do we work together as families, as churches and community partners, and as educators to support the child's learning as a team? What are the budgetary implications moving forward around academic excellence, equity, and all of the above? And then as we go along, I'm sure there'll be other questions that come up, and we'll provide forums and opportunities to address those. And lastly, just making sure that we clarify, refine, and communicate our philosophies and practices in a balanced manner moving forward, so that everybody feels like they understand what's going on, the why behind it, and the path moving forward. And lastly, important to academic excellence is a growth mindset, which I think this is a perfect last slide, a reminder that we all need to enter this work saying we can always do better as parents, we can always do better as educators and as a district in the work that we do, and we want to model that behavior and that mindset for our kiddos, who we hope will adopt the same over time. So the good news is, way back in 2018, Dr. Keogh launched a strategic plan that looks something like this, and you'll be creating a new one. You're in the process of creating a new one that will be coming this fall. Many of these things started way back when. So if you look back through the pages and pages and pages of that strategic planning process, we've already been trying to align curriculum K-12. The DCAP that provides students access to supports in Tier 1 in all the classrooms, looking at what was RTI, now MTSS process, integrating social justice and social emotional wellness standards across the discipline and into our content areas, exploring the impact of race and identity in the classroom, and looking at culturally responsive practices, focusing on anti-bullying, marginalization, and community building, and making sure that our teachers have time not only to collaborate with their peers within the building, but across buildings. So these are things that have been going on well before the equity audit, well before the pandemic. Things in motion. So moving forward, and this has been in a number of my letters, we are committing to making sure that we have opportunities for all community members to talk about our work moving forward and our goals as a district, making sure that all voices feel safe to express their perspectives and that they feel heard, and making sure, as I just said in the growth mindset, that we are being transparent about the work that we're doing and how we're moving forward. So that said, opportunities for input and dialogue. So again, my entry survey is out there for people who like to do things on a computer or perhaps don't want to put a face with their ideas. Dr. Hoyt has provided his email to anybody who would like to reach out to him to have an email conversation, a phone conversation, a Zoom, and people have taken him up on that. And we have 3 additional community forums coming up. I won't read the slide to you, but I will mention that the first one coming up on January 25th, which is next Wednesday, is going to be at the Sherborn Community Center. We will be providing childcare, I believe, for families. Yeah, thank you, Kate. And this is really an opportunity for people to say, okay, I have the draft of this plan, and I don't know what a culturally responsive curriculum is, or can you talk to me more about restorative practice, or here's my concern, can we talk through this so that before this becomes finalized, I can give you some thoughts and ideas from my perspective of what might work and what might not. It's time for bed. What might not work. And then right now, the other 2 are sketched to be voices of our community, similar to our student panel. We're very protective of our students, especially after the letter that was circulated that targeted many of them. Instead, we'll be hearing from adults in our community and their experiences, not, again, the majority, but as we're trying to solve a problem, how can we learn more about the experiences of our minority faculty members and community members and parents. The last is how do we work together as schools, as parents, and as community partners to fully educate our child, and who has what role in that process. If the second and third topics need to shift based on whatever happens next Wednesday, we can certainly shift and move. This is a work in progress. So we're happy to take feedback, thoughts, suggestions, questions.
I would just like to say that I was able to come to the student panel on that day, and I appreciate that opportunity, and it was incredibly moving, educational. I mean, I learned a lot. And I think that sometimes we have to battle against this perception that there's not a problem. And hearing those kids that day, it just blew the roof off of that. And I'm so glad that so many of the staff were there to hear it, because it was incredible. And I know there's privacy issues, but there's a way to share out some of those things that the kids shared. I mean, it's incredible.
We're hoping some of the adults will help us do that through one of the forums. I think, we promised our kids confidentiality, and again, we saw what happens when people get targeted by members of our community.
Megan? I think that it's a very difficult eye of a needle to thread to both very directly and effectively address the issues that I think most folks agree do exist in our community, and not just in our community, but in most communities, without moving toward and this is what we do all day long, and it's kind of the only thing that we do. And not because people do that on purpose, but because I think that, to your point at the beginning, you're being very transparent, but then there's a lot that comes out on this one topic, and then people start to say okay, is that all that's happening here? I think your team, both of you and the faculty and all the folks that have been involved, Dr. Hoyt, have done what I think is a very artful and thoughtful and reflective job detailing how we can do this in a way where we're not giving up the things that make people buy houses in this community, right? And that we're not giving up what we all think is important for our own children, which is that they can go through the Dover-Sherborn Public Schools and have a positive outcome. I ran into 2 different parents this week, and maybe partly because it's midterms at the middle and high school. The feedback I got, and these are parents who have had kids who were older and also have kids, into the middle school, was, gosh, I wonder what happened to challenge success. The midterms are back, And in fact, one of the families is also celebrating Lunar New Year, and it's like, this is just like a living hell, having to go through midterms at this time of the year, and maybe it's because my kids didn't experience this for a couple of years, but it really got me thinking about many of the things that you spoke about in this entry plan, and the idea of on-ramps and off-ramps, and got me thinking, like, is midterms in the middle school a thing we really need? But that's just my own, like, 2 cents. I think that it means a lot to me to hear that this is the sort of questions that you guys are asking too. And I don't think, having experienced a child who graduated with 2 years of not having any of those things and went on to great success in college, I don't think that by rethinking some of those things, by leaning back into challenge success, that we are losing the academic rigor that we are really proud of and that I think is really important. So I think you guys are doing a really artful job of doing both the things, or all the things. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think the students who came to this meeting and also our last meeting last week and spoke so eloquently about 2 different issues, both adding holidays that allow families to celebrate with their families, and also last week hearing from the students who feel very strongly, with my support, that we need to make sure our athletic facilities are accessible to people who have physical disabilities specifically. It means a lot to me that our students that they understand that we will hear them, and that this is a venue that they could come to if they're feeling like they need a larger audience, and that it builds their feeling connected to the community. So, we've been doing this for many years. It's not that often that large groups of students come into school committee meetings.
Mm-hmm. Any questions?
Just quickly, I want to say, personally, the working on the equity audit and hearing all the findings, and then where do you start? I mean, sometimes I just feel overwhelmed by all these different super important, amazing things, and where do you start? But the way you broke it down into the different categories and into the immediate, midterm, long-term, it's just, for me at least, helpful to get my head around, okay, how are we actually going to do this? Or did we just go through this whole big thing and then feel like, well, I don't know where to start? So I found that very helpful.
Yes, I'd second that. I think the draft document is excellent for outlining, because there is so much packed in, but really outlining how to prioritize and think about how it all fits together. The other thing I wanted to say is I did get to the November community night and thought it was terrific, and I do hope that everyone has access to those dates and can make it. And I love the title of the next one, of DEI Doubts. I mean, it's great to have the conversation at the table where we can all have real conversation. So I appreciate it.
I was also going to thank you for the coherence in which you sort of put it all together, the challenge success, the portrait of the graduate, the equity work. It is all really about what's best for our kids. And I was thinking, even as the students were speaking about Lunar New Year, like, that is a challenge success. We talk about playtime, downtime, and family time. And if, as a district, it's an equity concern, but it's also a challenge success concern. So they're very integrated, and I think that came across really beautifully in the plan. Thank you. Thank you.
Beth, if I could ask a question. So, echo everyone's sentiments. I'm very grateful for this sort of clear, I think it's more of an action plan, really, perhaps, than what the audit gave us, which was findings and some recommendations. This is, I think, taking things the next step and synthesizing. I am curious, though, I don't think there's necessarily like a one-to-one relationship between each step that you've delineated here and all of the findings and recommendations that we received in the audit. So are there particular categories or findings or recommendations that in your vetting process you stripped away, lent more emphasis to? I'm just trying to kind of
So if you look at all of
Yeah,
the
bridge the
iterations of this
documents.
document,
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
one-to-one correlations. There was check marking and crossing referencing. And I think when you go through the equity audit, and if you were just to take out all the recommendations, so many of them speak to student support, so many of them speak to advisory, so many of them speak to the elements of challenge, success, and portrait of graduate that already exists. So to those, they're easy because they're already in progress. There aren't, when we talk about adopt, adapt, and decline to act on, we haven't crossed anything out, but instead, areas where we know we need further conversation, we've left in that we need to have further conversation about these things bucket. To Denny's point, I think people are like, oh, we're going to get rid of AP classes and tracking. No, we're not. But we should probably have a conversation about the demographics of kids in our AP and honors classes and who's there and who's not there and why aren't they there and how can we provide support so all faces can be represented in those classes. So if that makes sense, the things that we're not ready, either already acting on based on years of work or ready to kind of launch, are kind of in that we need further discussion or they're a longer term goal. Nothing's been crossed out and needs to be like, where is the parking lot? The parking lot is in there.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's great work, piggyback everything said. It's really easy to look at what we aren't doing well and what could be done better, but to take a moment and just recognize that like a group of kids have now a number of times come in here and spoke like that exemplifies what you guys are doing really well, that they felt the confidence to come in here, that it was a safe place to come to, and they took a really big risk. I mean, you guys are doing as a district like a lot really well.
Lynn, I saw your hand.
I was going to follow on to your question. So, for example, the policy review, like, is that in here?
It is.
Didn't see it yet.
Yes. Yeah, and to be honest, the first iteration of compiling everybody's was twice this length because there was the things that came out of the equity audit, there was ideas the teachers had, there were ideas that parents had, and it got really overwhelming. It was like 12 pages. And so some of those we had to fit in, or just know that teachers are going to work on these things in their classroom, or parents are going to work on these things as parents. There was a lot of good ideas. It didn't all just come from the equity audit. It was desires of people to want to do what they think is in the best interest of kids based on the research that they've read, based on the data they've read, based on the voices they've heard.
I was just thinking about these affinity groups, and one of the things the student panels mentioned, some of the students mentioned is having those affinity groups start in middle school because they were so powerful and helpful to sort of name what was happening to them. So I don't know if that's something that has been discussed further, but I thought it was a great suggestion from the kids themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, we have some affinity groups at the middle school already. In fact, some of our high school kids are offering opportunities for both groups to meet together and provide mentoring opportunities, but there are certainly groups who don't have them yet. And I know Dr. Hoyt, one of his goals is not only to work with school committee, with parents and community members, with teachers, but he's also eager to meet with some of our kiddos and help some of those developed. And I know Miss Monique Marshall-Beal is very interested in that as well. So it's in the to-do list. Yeah.
I'm sure it'll come out. Like that said, in the next couple of weeks, we're meeting with groups of students during lunches, which I cannot wait for, and so I'm sure that will pop up.
And that's all students. That's more about just entry. It's not specifically about DEI work, but it's what is your vision and goals and dreams for the future of DS with pizza.
We're enough.
Now we have 23 minutes to get there. Tell us everything that we need to know and get out.
This doesn't hurt. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you, Beth.
Thank you,
Denny.
Thank you.
I appreciate your guidance in this important area, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. We have two policies for which we are doing a second read and taking a vote tonight. The first is the bullying policy, and the second is the security camera policy. Members should have received the latest versions of each of those in your packets. There's no change to the security camera policy from what we reviewed in November. And maybe Judy, if you don't mind, I'll hand it to you. Sorry to surprise you. The only change I think to the bullying policy was what was agreed upon at the meeting, which is removing some examples, if you will, of the types of discipline that may or may not comport with
Right.
our current thinking on discipline and the current law.
Right, so we took that,
requires
we took
different
those
levels of
out. We added a sentence that said, if the information in the policy contradicts the information in the plan governs. And in your packet is a copy of the plan with changes that the school district has made. Those are not what we're voting on. It's in that piece is in here for your information. Yes?
Yes. But again, thank you for the feedback. You updated the flow chart and a few other pieces. So hopefully it's clean from now. And as we start to think about restorative practices, there'll be more updates.
So is there any discussion concerning, we'll start with bullying. Anyone with questions or comments regarding the latest on that policy?
Does this top page go as part of the policy? I know that seems
That's the
very
plan,
trivial.
not the
That's the plan.
policy.
Sorry.
But if you see an edit or a change, feel free to mention it.
My last name spelled wrong, but I'm not sure that really matters.
That's to me.
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
No, just,
You didn't catch it on the first read, though.
It's good to spell this whole time.
not the last.
Anyone? All right. So let's go ahead then and take our votes regarding the bullying policy, and then we can turn to the plan policy after that. So I'll start with Dover. Is there a motion from the Dover School Committee to approve the bullying policy as presented? I should say the anti-bullying policy as presented.
Great, so moved.
Thanks, Colleen. Is there a second?
Jeff Cassidy, second.
Any discussion? All in favor? All right, motion carries for Dover School Committee. Amanda, how about
Yes.
Sherborn?
Sure. So I'd like to invite a motion from the Sherborn School Committee to approve the bullying prohibition plan as outlined here.
So moved, Dennis Kwon.
Thank you, Dennis. And second?
Rousseau, second.
Thanks, Sita. Any discussion? All right. Do we have to do roll call or can we do
Can do a,
all in favor?
yeah, hand vote, yeah.
All in favor? And I don't know if Kristen is on to vote or if
She
she's
is.
listening. I don't know if
I
she's
assume she's
Oh, here she comes.
I'm
here. Well, maybe we should do roll call for Sherborn because we have a hybrid attendance,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. All right, so Kristen Abro?
Kristen Abro, yes.
Yep, thank you. Peter Russo?
Yes.
Dennis Kwon?
Yes.
And Amanda Brown, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
And Maggie.
Sure. Do I have a motion from the Regional School Committee to approve the bullying prohibition policy as shared in your packet this evening?
Judy Miller, so moved.
Is there a second? Thank you, Lynn. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Thank you.
All right. All right, turning now to the security camera policy. As I mentioned, this is unchanged from the version that was reviewed in November. It is very heavily based on the MASC model policy concerning security cameras in schools. Any questions or comments from any members regarding this policy? All right, then I would suggest we go ahead and move to vote. For the Dover School Committee, is there a motion to approve the security camera policy as included in your packets? Thank you, Doreen. Is there a second?
Ms. Grossman, second.
Thanks, Liz. Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Thank you very much. Amanda, turning it over to you.
Thank you. Could I have a motion from the Sherborn School Committee to approve the security camera policy?
Dennis Kwon, so moved.
Thank you.
Peter Russo, second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right. Roll call vote. Kristen?
Kristen Abro, yes.
Gita?
Gita Russo, yes.
Yes.
Dennis Quant, yes, and Amanda Brown, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maggie for Region?
Do I have a motion from the Regional School Committee to approve policy ECAF, security cameras in schools, as shared in your packet?
Mark Healy, so moved.
Thank you, Mark. Do I have a second?
Andrew Johnson, second.
Thank you, Angie. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
All right. Thank you. That completes our work with those two policies and brings us to a vote to approve the 2023-2024 school year calendar. Beth, shall I turn it to you?
Sure. So you have to start somewhere. So given the holidays that we currently celebrate, you'll see a draft of our current practice rolled over to next year. And that's, again, what you're seeing before you. I know that there are some students and some community members who are advocating, as we heard this evening, towards adopting additional holidays that be recognized with no school days, including Diwali, Lunar New Year, and Eid. Next year, I think I put this in my memo, many of them fall on weekends or during already scheduled vacations. The only one that does not would be Eid, which is Wednesday, April 10th, and that's a scheduled school day. So if we were to maintain our current schedule, unfortunately, the only one that we would have school on would be, again, Eid in April. Wednesday, April 10th. That said, I'd love to hear from the committee your thoughts, questions, ideas, and then we can figure out how you'd like to move forward, whether you'd like to approve the calendar, think about the calendar, etc. Okay.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Because I feel like there's so many different ways we could go with this. And having heard from the students, and obviously we've been thinking about these things already. When do we have to vote this? Like, can we get more time to get more community input? I realize we could also approve it this year and spend some good quality time in the next few months preparing for the following year. Mm-hmm. I'm just leery to. There's just so much to think about in here. I'm leery to kind of make big changes tonight, I guess.
I would say, do you want to answer that, or you have additional questions?
Oh, no.
I would just say that your neighbors and peers are probably eager to get the school calendar so they can start planning things for next year. I do think we have some time, but not a lot before we have to kind of get it out to the community to do some planning, buses, etc.
Judy?
Yeah, I hear you, Kate. And you know, when I was in K through 12, I never got the Jewish holidays off, and it was an incredible thing for my children, and I likewise hear what the students were saying today and can personally understand how they're feeling, because you're not only feeling like, oh my God, how am I going to get my homework done? You're also feeling other, and that's not a great feeling. I think that we're lucky that the vast majority of these holidays next year fall on a weekend. I think that this is such an important issue, and that it needs more attention than us simply going, well, what do you think about this holiday? What do you think about that one? What should we do? This is an issue that I think needs to be studied, and I think it needs to have student voice involved. It needs to have community voice involved. It needs to have educator voice involved. And it's of a magnitude for us. And yes, other districts are doing this, and you know, I mean, we're not voting on this today, but there's got to be a way to do this but I think it's important to hear everyone's voice, and so my suggestion would be to, put together some kind of a group and start this as a process and take the time to do it in a really inclusive way. And I don't think that that's going to be, I think it's a much more important issue than to give it short shrift and get it done for next school year. I only say this because it's an issue that really gets to the core of my being. And so I would just suggest that that would be a way to go about it that I think would be beneficial to everybody.
Do you want to call it 30 minutes?
Gita?
So one thing just to keep in mind as we're figuring this out is that Diwali and the Lunar New Year are not celebrated on just one day. So, I understand that the last day of Diwali is a Sunday, but it's celebrated over 5 days. Mm-hmm. And the Lunar New Year is celebrated over several weeks. Mm-hmm. So, it's the thing to keep in mind is that for, the Jewish holidays, for the Catholic holidays, there are several on the calendar. These other cultures or religions or these other holidays are a one-time thing that they're looking for, and so it's something that I think I've shared that, we celebrate Diwali, and being in a family where my husband is not Indian and is not Hindu, it's kind of hard to explain to my kids that, all the Catholic holidays, of course you don't have to go to school, you can go to church. Well, what if we want to go to temple or we want to go see our cousins or we want to go do something? And not only is there classes in school and homework, but there's sports. And, there was last year, there was a CSA meeting and the school advisory committee meeting on the same day. And I'm should I go because these are things that I'm responsible for, or do I not go because I'm supposed to be teaching my children about this holiday? So I just think it's not just about, okay, it falls on a Sunday, because it's going to be different every year. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's more about, do you observe it in some way or not? Mm-hmm. Because MLK Day is supposed to be 1/15. If that falls on a Sunday, you still celebrate it on the 16th. Mm-hmm. And so that's just my 2 cents.
And that goes more to the point of, Judy's comment that it's something that needs to be studied and thought through, how we do it. And I don't know how much have we thought about the things we're not including. Like, these are the holidays that, sorry, I just launched in. I wasn't in line.
Go for
it. But yeah, have we thought about the holidays we have not included in here? Not that, we can take 6 months out of the year and turn it into holidays, but, that's another perspective to look at is these are the holidays that have been brought to our attention by the students, but there are others that are just as important to other cultures that we don't even know about.
Like that's on page 79, right? Is that what this list is the ones that?
Right, that additional chart that was included. Again, we tried to be inclusive, but it's not an exhaustive list of all holidays, and certainly can be and should be added to.
But a survey could be done.
Yeah.
Right? Or something like that.
It seems like we need to poll the community and see which holidays they are celebrating, they're not celebrating, they want to celebrate, they need the space for, might need the space the night before, and that we need to be more educated in general about the holidays. I think all of us do. But I think asking the community what's valuable to you, what's important, where, for your family, I think that's an important, we need to find that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it goes.
Poor Maggie's been very patient.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
I think that, I'm reading what the other communities do. I am extremely uncomfortable with the solution that Concord Carlisle solved. Okay, to remove all religious and cultural holidays from their calendar. So they go to
remove all of them, or just a few of the ones?
I don't know. I'm just going based on Beth's memo.
But it was just a few, right? It was just
Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Good Friday, because the others fall during
goes to school
vacations.
on all the religious and cultural holidays. So I am personally very uncomfortable with that and could not support that. as a solution for all the reasons that were so much more I'm sorry, it's past my bedtime too. That were so eloquently shared by the students and by many of our colleagues here tonight. I think that on the other hand, the reality is that what we actually need to do is take a much more critical look at our actual school calendar, because this year, because of the way weekends fall, one of the Jewish holidays falls on a weekend. I recognize that these many of these celebrations take place over, but this coming school year is one thing, but in the next school year, just mathematically playing it out, they mostly fall on weekdays, and that would put us at school until June 28th, I believe. I could be off by a day. So I think that what we actually need to do as a community, if we were to do what I think is the better thing, after we figure out what are holidays that are celebrated and that are recognized by many members of our community, and we've identified all of them, maybe we've missed something, that we have a task force that looks at our school calendar. I think that we can't push it off this school year. I've had at least a half a dozen calls directly from parents, like literally in the last 10 days. When is school starting? I got to do a camp. I got to do with this. Like, people need to know. And if we are to include more holidays, we have to change the beginning or ending time of school, or we have to talk about vacation schedule and whether or not we stick with February and April or we go with a March break. We have to talk about, all those things. Mm-hmm. And that's a big conversation that can't happen, I don't think, respectfully of the community at the end of January into February while people are trying to plan their lives and all that. It would be my recommendation that we do anticipate taking time off of school for these holidays in the 24-25 school year, and that we convene a task force of families, teachers, all the things to answer the question, how do we make that happen in a respectful way of the community, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with what Maggie's saying, and maybe as a potential short-term, more immediate relief, could we think about homework policies around the holiday? Because I feel you, Judy. Like, it is just a day off is amazing. That is an amazing gift on a holiday. That's important to your family. The homework catch up is really stressful. And that feels like an easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's at least a stepping stone.
Let the steam out a little.
Yeah.
And can I add something to that, which is, and I think probably what we need is a proposal from the administration about that. But for example, the issue of Lunar New Year, I understand, and that is sort of like how Passover is for us. It's not even on the radar screen here. But one idea with regard to homework is, and what was said about Lunar New Year is really important, which is, we don't have to do that homework, but we don't have to do it on that day, but it gets put off so that then we have twice as much to do the next week. Maybe we should think about, in line with Challenge Success, no homework on any of these holidays for anyone. And I'm not saying, and I'm not the educator. It's not for me to say, but I think it's important to put that together this year, and to use the concepts of Challenge Success and the equity audit as a framework for figuring out what that should be, and then how we can make sure that the teachers actually comply. And I think that's a really good idea.
So I don't want to be the chair, you're the chair. I'm hearing.
Well, is there anyone
two
else?
things.
I'm hearing a desire to form a task force, which I think makes very good sense, and a desire to examine how can we better address homework and religious holidays coexisting, religious or cultural holidays coexisting
I
together.
agree. I think that the point about homework and work for students, because I do, I've heard that, I heard that a couple times tonight, and I know that is a huge, to have midterms this week where we're also celebrating cultural holidays is like bringing it into a very strong focus, but I feel like that should be something that we really work on during next school year. Does that make sense? We're not we're going to kick the whole can down the road. I don't want to walk away from here and feel like we just made a task force and didn't do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I'm hearing it from the educators. I'm sorry. No, I'm hearing it from the educators as well, as they want to be respectful and supportive of all of our kids. They're just looking for direction, and I know they'd love a seat at the table. I think in the short run, like this year, like this winter and spring, to talk about homework and testing policies for next year, athletic events, practices, theater practices. What is our philosophy and unified approach going to be moving forward in general? And then in next year, then the task force can kind of launch in the fall to look at the actual calendar for the following year.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, do we stick with the calendar that's before you and approve it, or are there other shifts and changes?
And I would say actually I've been here too long, but we actually had a committee, calendar committee that I was on in 2011, and looked at all the vacations, looked at everything. I think one difference that you guys are talking about tonight is that it was school committee, educators, and administration, but we didn't really have community at the table, so that's a little bit of a change, but I would give yourself more than starting in the fall if you want to have a calendar in January.
I think it should start.
It's been a whole year now.
Yeah.
Brought forward something, so you're going to shortchange yourself if you wait till then.
I agree. I think we need to form the task force imminently and then start meeting, this spring.
So there might even be someone in the room who's done this before, who'd be willing to help move that task force forward.
Done? I actually attended those meetings, many of those meetings, and one of my takeaways was that I don't want it to become a conversation where it's like my holiday is more important than your holiday and we can only have so many and it's a zero-sum game, because that felt really yucky. I still remember people in the room who said things that were very hurtful to other people.
But honestly, how are people supposed to feel? Right now, when there's clearly Jewish holidays and clearly Catholic holidays that you have multiple of in the school year, and you have these girls coming, talking for the student body and telling you that they just want one day to celebrate something that, and they're going through the population. We're talking about equity and inclusion, and then kick it down the line or whatever, kick the can down, whatever you did, I don't know what it was. But the point of it is I don't think we can just brush it off. I think it needs to. We wrote today that we are brushing it off without further conversation. This conversation's 5 minutes long. It deserves a little bit longer.
Right, but let me say this. First of all, I don't perceive this to be something where we sit around and talk about which are the important holidays. Wait, can I just finish what I'm saying? I think that this is going to be a process where we need to educate one another about the holidays and then talk to the community. For example, when we did school start times, we got a whole lot of information. And we gathered a whole lot of information, and we had multiple meetings with different stakeholder groups and talked about it and came up with different iterations.
It might take a really long time to come to a conclusion.
Yes.
But I think that what we can do
Yeah.
is not vote on it right away, so that we can maybe keep it on the agenda so we can discuss it and go back to those 3 student body members and say, look, we're working on this. This is what we've done. We have a task force. We're going to do surveys. We're going to do, and go back to them with a little bit more of like, this is what we're going to do to be proactive to figure out how we can do this, if at all. It's not, there's, if we can do a second read on a bullying policy, I think you can do a second conversation about a calendar.
But Gita, it's going to take longer than just between now and 2 months from now.
I'm not saying that we're going to have the answer. I'm saying that we're going to have come up with the things that we're going to do to be able to get the answer. So I don't anticipate, that's what I'm saying. We're going to come up with, these are the 3 things that we're going to be working on in the next school year, so that next January, when we're sitting down to make an impact for the following school year, we have made an informed decision.
So what you're saying, and I'm sorry we're having a conversation, but what you're saying then is that we sort of put a task force together and we get a plan, and then we come back together and at that point say, here's our plan for figuring out what we're going to do about this problem, and now let's vote on the calendar.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that.
Saying, like, putting it out there.
Yeah.
It's about the communication, right? I mean, I think some of our meetings we've talked about how we need to do a better job of communicating to the parents and to the community and to all the different members of our community, right? And letting them know what it is that we're doing. If we are very clear of, this was brought to our attention, this is something that has been brought to us, it's been very important, and it's like, it is an issue, but we need more time to come up with it. We've had a lot on our agenda. We need more time to put real thought into this. But what we've done is, instead of just saying no, what we're going to do is proactively do the surveys, put a task force together, get the feedback from people, and figure out logistically, can we do this or not? I think it's kind of like, it's okay if we vote no, as long as we have the follow through in place to say, this is what we're doing and we're committing to this. Because I think the commitment to doing it and showing that we as a school committee value their opinions and their thoughts and their feelings, and that we've designed a task force, is a pretty valuable thing, because at least they feel like they're being heard. Just my 2 cents. I feel like voting on it when I feel like my opinion is that it's too early.
One concern that I have, just from a practical perspective, because I really appreciate the students that came forward tonight, and personally, it's my desire to find a way to acknowledge and recognize these holidays that are important to families that are living in our community. We don't have another joint meeting on the books until April. And I don't think we can
We can't
wait until then. So, Amanda, did you want to?
We'll finish your thought, but I have a thought about that.
Well, I either think that we need to sort of firm up this plan so that we can, if we take a vote tonight and it doesn't include these holidays, so that we can flesh out, here is what we are going to do to be able to address these issues, or we need to come up with a meeting between now and April.
Can we move to vote to accept this calendar contingent upon creating the task force?
In conjunction with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, whatever. Yeah.
Vote includes creating the task force.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that way.
Yeah. And what do you, I know I'm not supposed to do this.
I think I feel like, I don't even know if I'm explaining myself properly. I feel like I'm not opposed to saying no for next year. That's not my issue. I think my issue is I feel like if we're going to say no, we should at least be very clear to the community that we heard them, we understand it, we're putting it on our agenda, we're making it a priority. It will get addressed. It's not going to just get tossed aside and be brought up for the first time in January when we're expected to make a vote. I feel like we need to show our commitment, just like we're showing our commitment in other ways. And I think that those girls that came here today, that they're representing a body of people that sent them here as representatives, and I don't want them to feel like they came here for nothing. I want them to feel like they came here, they were heard, it was understood. We're going to do our research, we're going to get our information, we're going to talk to all the members of the community, the educators, to figure out the coaches maybe too, right? I mean, it's athletics as well. It's the CSAs, it's everyone, right?
Are you envisioning all of that happening before next planned meeting? Is that what you're? No. Okay.
By next January, we should be able to do some of that. Yeah. That next January is when we have to vote for the following year. We have to wait 12 months.
I think we're on the same page.
Yes. Can I float an idea that kind of maybe bridges the two? I agree, Gita, that sort of what's on our agenda shows what we value, and our school calendar ideally sort of embodies our values, and I do think that that's a bigger conversation for sure, and I think a task force makes a lot of sense. What if, so we have a Sherborn meeting on February 7th. If we had a joint meeting after that, and between now and then, which actually February is not that far away, put together, asked for volunteers to contact chairs if they're interested in a task force, came together on the 7th and said, okay, here is what we've done. Here's who's going to be on this task force. This work will take place. Here's the timeline. And we're going to vote to approve or not approve the calendar for this year, but know that this is what's happening because we heard you. I'm not sure how people feel about that.
I'm comfortable with that.
Well, if we don't,
Are people available?
I mean,
It
could be put out in a letter, right?
Oh, it's already?
It's region and Sherborn. We're doing two.
Oh, we already have two on the 7th. Okay.
Well, but I'm saying you're already
Yeah.
two.
We're already here.
The group is already coming
Yes.
over.
Yeah. So we just have to find a time.
Yeah.
Third group.
And
in there, in
it
the
shouldn't
middle.
take that long.
It would be a relatively, I mean, we could ostensibly do the one Sherborn meeting, have a half-hour meeting that would be everybody. We can do hybrid if people can't come in person, and then continue on with the region meeting.
Yeah, and Dover could show up online.
Dover, are you available on February 7th? Okay.
Yeah, it's hybrid. But my question is, on February 7th, are we going to, before that, they're going to have the task force and work on it and decide on?
No. We have the task force formed, or the school committee members of the task force formed, right?
And we need,
That's going to be.
right. We would need, I mean, thinking about the start time task force, there were more than just school committee people. And that may not necessarily be able to happen by the 7th. But
Amanda, respectfully, I think it's not enough time to put a task force together beyond simply the people in this room. It just, you're going to have to reach out to educators, you're going to have to reach out to students, and we're now, that's like 3 weeks away. And I love the idea, but I don't think it's going to work to get anywhere at all on planning by February 7th.
well, even if we just have our
I
together.
Well, we could have ours, but that's only gonna, but that's not gonna, we can't, that group can't do any work at all. And so there's, just doesn't seem to me.
But why can't we just say that why don't we vote on like we're going to create a task force?
That's exactly what I think we should do.
Task force.
Yeah, I think everybody's on the same.
Sending out surveys. We're going to vote on making this a higher priority agenda item and not let it 6.
Do we have to
Yeah.
vote on that? Or
Yes, well, we can do, but we can vote on it, and we can do it tonight.
We vote to direct the superintendent, because the task force is run by the superintendent.
Yeah.
So we vote to direct the superintendent to form a task force that will begin meeting in the spring.
So they go out together. So
Yeah.
those girls, when they read about it, they can say, okay.
We could take it as a separate vote.
Right.
So,
But it's still in
vote on the calendar.
We could vote on the task force. We're directing the superintendent to form a task force.
And assistant superintendent.
We direct you to form it, like just legally, like the task force is directed by the superintendent, then you can delegate one. But we direct the superintendent.
Sorry, Angie, I didn't hear you.
But this is like, it's like the land of and and the door of or. This is the and part. We're doing this and this. It's not or.
Yeah.
One vote with an and.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
the vote is.
So I can do the motion. I'll move to approve the calendar as submitted by the superintendent and direct the superintendent to form a task force made up of school committee members, educators, students, and community members to study the issue of school holidays.
To include holidays celebrated by members of our community in the school, like days off calendar.
Right.
Not the
Yeah.
like that.
To form a task force to review the calendar.
For
and
more
consider-
inclusivity.
Yeah.
Right. For
Yeah.
purposes of inclusivity of holidays, religious and cultural holidays.
Is it also like, can we make the start of saying no homework on those days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a task force, so the superintendent
I
can,
meant in this vote.
No, that's
That's like an
that's
operational
detail.
thing. We can't,
Yeah.
the committee can't tell,
Teachers.
we can't
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
but the superintendent.
I can launch that conversation.
Yeah, and that's part of what the superintendent may decide the task force will do.
Because at least we're doing something, right?
I mean, I think the tension that we're presented with is that, I mean, I don't know, but I think that there seems to be receptivity in this room to having our calendar be more inclusive. At the same time, I'm not sure folks are comfortable with having school extended till July, right? So the idea is, how do we think creatively about our calendar?
Just a long weekend for February and not having
How do we think about our calendar in such a way that it better reflects our values?
Ah, that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And that could include looking at things in addition to holidays. I mean, there could be other things that committee thinks are important that our calendar should do or not do.
And conversations that have to be brokered with the different stakeholder groups, because if we decide to make a major change in calendar and surrounding towns, including towns where our teachers have their children in school do not, it gets tricky. So, yeah.
I mean, you know, to your point, and I'm speaking as a person who's Catholic, right? Like, Good Friday is on our calendar. It's not, I would be comfortable giving away Good Friday if we need to. People could have their thing, but it's also right now is in the teacher's contract. So we can't decide Good Friday's canceled without going to the table and negotiating that. And so, you know, I recognize that there's more Christian holidays, you know, although some of them are
in our
state.
family, we celebrate both, right? So like, I mean, I wouldn't want to say to my husband, okay, I got the ball, you lost Good Friday.
Right.
I mean, that's not the point, you know, like, that's not what I'm trying to do.
I understand.
It's, you know, but I think that when you are trying to do something that is as impactful as this could be, it cannot be rushed. But I also feel like some statement from the school committee to say that it has been heard and we understand and we value this and that we're going to take the time to do it shows commitment on our part. And if all we're trying to do is be better communicators as a community and making sure that everyone knows what we're doing and transparency and it, if we can do that, we're at least in good faith showing people that we care.
We're all on the same page.
Yeah,
So
we're
do
all
we-
on the same page.
Do we have a motion on the table?
Well, do we?
Or not
Or not really? I mean, I think it's two votes, right? There's one concerning the calendar, and there's one concerning directing the superintendent.
It should be one vote.
Yeah.
It's a one vote because it's important to connect the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a motion to approve the calendar as presented and to direct the superintendent to form a task force to review our school calendar for greater inclusivity of religious and cultural holidays.
Oh,
Yes.
beautiful.
Perfect. Our values.
To better reflect our values. I'm glad we have this on tape because I could not repeat that. If you
I wish you good luck.
Yeah, I know.
All right, so
Just might be, to say that it goes with our values, and then if we end up voting against it, like in the long run, I mean, might just want to say like more inclusivity and leave a period because the vote very much could be next year no, and then it's not completely going with our values.
Well, if it's no, then we're saying that those are our values.
But our values are that we don't care.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, let's not use the word value, let's just use the word inclusivity.
Right, fine, let's do it. Let's get it done.
Okay,
All right.
so direct the superintendent to form a task force to review the calendar for inclusivity, greater inclusivity of religious and cultural holidays, period.
Great.
Yes? All right. Is there such a motion from the Dover School Committee?
Liz Grossman, so moved.
Thank you, Liz. Is there a second?
Melissa Perez, second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Thanks. All right, turn it over to you, Amanda, for Sherburne.
Okay, do I have a motion from Sherburne to approve the calendar as presented and to direct the superintendent to put together a task force to review our school calendar to better reflect inclusivity of religious holidays?
Universal, so moved.
Thank you, Gita. Second?
Dennis, what, second?
Any discussion? I don't want to leave you out, Kristen. I don't know where I'm at.
She's here, she's here.
Kristen.
Kristen Amberly, yes.
Okay. All right. Gita Russo.
Gita Russo, yes.
Dennis Cohen, yes.
And Amanda Brown, yes. Thank you.
Thank you all. Maggie?
Okay. I might not get this exactly the same, but
You can also say me too.
okay.
Me too.
So, do I have a motion to approve our calendar as presented tonight and to direct the superintendent to form a task force to do what Sarah said earlier? Thank you, Lynn. For a second.
Second, Judy Miller, second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, those of you who have an interest in serving on this task force should please very soon contact your school committee chairs so that we can then convey that to the superintendent team. And we can get this task force up and running.
Great.
All right. That brings us to the Connolly bus contract 2-year extension.
I've been here so long, it's only 1 year now. So this is always the cream, this is like the gravy because we take the big hit, as you know, for those of you here, when this contract started, we had 20% increase the first year. Year 4 and 5 are the extension, you stay with them, you get low rate. So this hopefully will be a slam dunk to approve the extension for 2 years. The first year's, for next year's 1%, and fiscal year 25 is 1.5%. So presented for each of your districts is your total transportation cost for your in-district people, school to home to school transportation. And it is you each contract separately with Conley, so it will be 3 separate votes by committee for just your terms of your contracts.
Okay, are there questions for Dawn?
Do we have perspective on just sort of quality of service, any issues? I see mostly financial decision here, but is there any qualitative info that we should know?
I think they are a great partner. Granted, we have a few hiccups here and there, but we run 19 buses on 4 routes each day, and so it's minimal. They've got loyal drivers, and just so you know, whenever we go out to bid, they're the only ones who bid. So there probably would not be any other options, but luckily they are a very great partner, and I will say I've enjoyed all the years I've worked for them. They are responsive to our needs, and I think you'll find that a lot of our parents treat the bus drivers like family. That's, I think, the importance of a bus driver is, especially at the elementary level. We had a bus this morning that was a little late or early. We're not quite sure exactly what happened, but we had more parents calling asking if the bus driver was okay versus like where was the bus. So that just gives you a feel of sort of the community that we've built with Conley. Yeah. So.
Similar to the teacher contract, I'm assuming there's knock-on effect to like the calendar on this contract as well. Is that fair? On the school calendar?
It's on school calendar, yeah.
No, meaning like if we were to change the school calendar,
they'll
this.
do whatever. No.
So it's not
We'll still have, no matter what, we'll still have 181 days. We tell them what 181 days we want. There's nothing in the contract about days that they do or don't drive.
All right. Well, let's start with the vote from Dover then. Is there a motion from the Dover School Committee to approve the Connolly bus contract 2-year extension as presented? Colleen Bird, so moved. Thanks, Colleen. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Billy. Any discussion? All right, all in favor? All right, that motion passes. Amanda?
All right, is there a motion from Sherborn to approve the 2-year extension of the Connolly transportation contract as provided in the existing contract awarded in April of 2020?
Dennis Quant, so moved.
Thanks, Dennis.
Second.
Second. Thanks. Any discussion? All right, Kristen?
Kristen Everly, yes.
Keita?
Keita Russo, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis Quant, yes.
And Amanda Brown, yes.
Thank you. Maggie?
Do I have a motion to approve the 2-year extension of the Michael J. Connolly and Sutton's transportation contract as provided in the existing contract awarded in April of 2020 for the regional school district? Motion made by Kate Potter, second by Lynn Collins. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Thank you, and for the chairs, I will reach out to Conley and we'll get a 1-page contract for you to stop.
Thank you, Dawn. All right, on our consent agenda, we have meeting minutes from the November 8th, 2022 joint school committee meeting and a request for Westboro to join the Accept Collaborative. Are there questions or comments regarding either of these items from committee members?
Is there any downside for us to letting Westboro join the Accept Collaborative?
No.
Okay.
That's your recommendation?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I think Wayland will be next
Okay.
on your agenda.
It doesn't hurt us to have more people join the collaborative. Okay.
Shares the overhead.
Yes, I would assume that, but we have to vote, so I guess there's.
All right. So is there a motion from the Dover School Committee to approve the consent agenda?
Ms. Bresnan, so moved.
Thank you, Liz. Second?
What was the first?
Any discussion? All right, all in favor? Motion passes. Amanda, for Sherborn?
Is there a motion from Sherborn to approve the consent agenda?
Dennis Quant, so moved.
Thanks, Dennis.
Keita Russo, second.
Thanks. Discussion? All right. Kristen?
Kristen Everly, yes.
Thank you. Keita Russo?
Keita Russo, yes.
Dennis?
Dennis Quant, yes.
And Amanda Brown, yes.
Is there a motion from the region to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Angie Johnson, second.
Second.
Mark Healy, any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes 6-0.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I know it was a long evening, but these were important discussions and start of more important discussions. So again, please, those of you who have the time and interest to serve on the task force, please reach out to your chairs. And I think that brings us to the point where we can take a quick vote to unanimously adjourn.
Yep.
All right. Adjourned at 9:14. Thank you, everyone.